Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. Actually, I'm told that the last member of our committee is in the waiting room. Should be there. Excellent. My apologies. Welcome to the March 2nd regular school committee meeting at 9:30 a.m. being held remote due to the COVID-19 closure. I'm going to start by going over the agenda for this morning. We will start with a student report. We have one of our students here this morning. We'll then move into public comment. We have 3 report and discussion items. We have DCFC direct current fast charger presentation. We have fiscal year 22 budget update on specifically on enrollment projections. We have a COVID-19 district update. We have, I believe it's 4 action items. We have a vote to approve interim superintendent contract. That will be a discussion. We aren't actually quite ready to vote that. Vote to approve the mascot logo change. Vote to appoint curriculum subcommittee membership and approval of minutes. We have a chair report, superintendent report. We have future agenda items and next meeting dates. And with that, I would like to welcome Evan to give us a student report. Appreciate, as always, on a school day that you're here with us. So come to the table, so to speak, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here as always. Just a few updates for you all this morning. First, as I'm sure some of you or most of you may know, the Whs Senate, which is comprised of the Winchester High School class officers and student council officers, is working to interview school committee candidates in anticipation of the upcoming election. And they'll talk about policy, and then they'll, I think, make an endorsement at the end, which is something really exciting for students to get involved in local government. We also have a new opportunity at the high school from Service Learning, which is a leadership and community service training program that's going to involve students pitching ideas to address mental health needs of their peers. And there will be a couple different ways for people to get involved and eventually possibly earn grants to work on those ideas. There are also a couple of drives going on. There's a bottle drive for the Fells Club and a toy drive for the One Wish Project over the next few months. So if anyone has any of those things and wants to contribute. And lastly, the COVID pool testing started today, which is very exciting. So that is the process by which the students, starting with the seniors, can go and be tested in a pool as opposed to individually to work on finding more COVID cases in a more effective and efficient way. If anyone has any questions about that, I actually was the first student there this morning unexpectedly, and I was the inaugural customer, as they called me. So that was really exciting. It was really well put together, and it seemed like it's going to be a pretty effective way. And that they'll have it timed out pretty well so that students won't be missing school, was my perspective on that. So if anyone has any questions or if I missed anything, definitely let me know.
Thank you so much. I'd like to just kick it off with, can you tell us a little bit more about how the testing went? You sort of said it was smooth. Were there a lot of, sort of a little bit more, because I think we're all dying to see, sort of have had your vision of what it was like to experience, because we, just sort of sitting here, we don't see what it looks like. A lot of students, a lot of people working there. I mean, sort of what was it like?
So I got there 3 minutes after it opened, which I did not know was happening. So I was the only student there, but there were kids coming in as I left. There were a ton of volunteers. There were some parents that I know from different like PTA and other parent organizations. There were also some volunteers from Project Beacon, which is organizing it. And so there were a lot of adults in the gym. So it was super easy. I was led in through the gym entrance, walked upstairs to the gym. I got checked in where I gave my name and I got like a number, which was my assigned pod. I went off on my own to blow my nose, to do the test myself with the swab. And then I quite literally put the swab in like a cup so that all the swabs from one pod will go in one cup, and then they'll test that together. And then there's also a space there for students to do independent work, because if they want to stay in the school to do work before school actually starts, they have to stay in the gym rather than just going out to the school.
Thanks. That sounds super easy. So I would open up if anybody else has any questions for Evan. Ms. Marchot?
I usually don't ask our student questions, so this is my inaugural question for you. How do you feel about the school year academically? Are you comfortable? Are you being challenged? Are you still learning a lot? Can you just give us a little short update?
Yeah, of course. I think that this year I really have been impressed by my teachers being able to like work on the same amount of content that we normally would. I think I'm a bit biased because I'm in AP classes this year, so we're working on the same content level. But on the one hand, that's been helpful for me personally, because even though teachers have less flexibility, there is still that drive to do that same amount of things. And I know from underclassmen too, and people who are taking other classes that aren't that structured, I think they've also had the same experience where they've been working and still learning a lot. I think most things, like from my experience, teachers have almost been disappointed because they've had to drop like the day where they do the fun activity. But from our perspective, I think most of my teachers have been really good at actually fitting in all the stuff that we should be learning. I've also been really appreciative. Most of the teachers are being very generous and understanding this year. Even not with workload, with deadlines, not like completely lax, but just much more understanding, much more, I guess, like proactive in terms of our well-being and how much work we'll be doing. I know that was a concern that a bunch of students had at the beginning of the year, was with our off days, that teachers didn't really know, like nobody knows how much work to assign when you're not in school. So I personally have actually found that teachers have been very understanding and very good at scheduling like a normal amount of work that is still covering all the content. It has definitely been more independent learning, which works for me. I know other students have struggled with the more independent side of things when you're not in school, but in one way or another, I found that most classes have been covering the same material that they would, and have been doing it in a way that's like challenging and also still engaging given the year.
And because I think teachers have done an incredible amount of work, and just I can't thank them enough, and the administration and everybody. The people who are struggling, the students who are struggling, do you find the teachers to be receptive to them, to kind of engage them more one-on-one?
Definitely. It's harder to see because we can't do it in the classroom, but I do know for sure that students have a lot of teachers have been holding office hours in addition to their normal Zoom classes, and also that the school updated its policy recently about having kids come in early for help. So I do know a lot of friends and a lot of teachers that have been working, having students come in early. I think my English teacher has been working with people on essays, stuff like that, where they're still able to get that help. And on the one hand, it makes it almost easier because it's not like you're in class with everybody else. So it is a bit more like, I think students have to take the initiative to ask for that extra help, and it is harder to schedule, of course, but there is that time for sure.
I don't know how many meetings I have left or which meetings you'll be at. I just want to say, Evan, you are an incredible person, and it makes me so proud to know that you represent our student body. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the amazing perspective, the positivity you radiate, and the eloquence and intelligence. And I just want to say, I'm so proud of Winchester District because of the way you represent us. And I really thank you for bringing us your voice every week as much as possible. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And I definitely want to thank you all. Likewise, I mean, I don't have many meetings left, but I do want to thank the committee, of course. I've been here this is my third year, which seems wild, but it's been an amazing opportunity, and I've learned a lot about the school, and just it's been great to connect with the community. So I feel honored to like be able to represent the school, and I guess I'm glad that I can do that in a positive way.
Thank you. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Evan, on that note, I want to circle back to something we talked about briefly a couple of meetings ago. I had asked you if you and your peers were thinking about some of the lessons learned this year from the student point of view, things that perhaps are working especially well in the pandemic. We've had to change so much. Has it made you and your peers maybe rethink some changes that we might want to sustain in future years, even on the backside of coronavirus, just like a lot of institutions and businesses have done? They're rethinking their model. And I was encouraged because I think you told me you guys have actually already started some of those conversations, and you'd be willing to bring some of that back to us. And for my part, I just want to say I'm eager to hear about it. I think it deserves a place, Mr. Chairman, not just under student report, but on an agenda. I'd really love to hear from these folks. To Zena's point, though, we have an election coming soon, so perhaps this warrants a little bit of thought about whether this is a presentation. I don't know if Evan, you and your peers could be ready to do something before then, or if it would necessarily come later in the spring. But I really don't want to lose that opportunity before we lose our students, especially our seniors, to have some of that feedback and some back and forth conversation. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And I hope that the chair and the vice chair and the superintendent hears. I think that could be a tremendously valuable conversation for all of us to have. And so then related to that, I want to pitch a question, which you don't have to answer in great detail now, but it's the kind of thing I'd love to talk about when we do get the presentation. My understanding is that in some classes, how shall I put this? My understanding is in some classes, sometimes instruction takes a backseat to assessment. So for significant tests and exams, I think for some reasons, a lot of us can actually understand. I'm curious if you have a similar understanding. Do you feel like we're doing a good job balancing in-person instruction versus the need for in-person assessments? Or, maybe I should just leave it at that. Do you have a perspective on that? Do your peers have a perspective on that? And then, just as in a regular school year, I know our teachers and teams work really hard to avoid students having, let's say, 4 exams on the same day for obvious reasons. It seems to me it's really tough if you're in cohort AA or BB, because now it's just 2 days a week. You don't have 5 days to stagger those major assessments anymore. Do you feel like our teacher team and administrative teams are doing a good job sort of staggering that, or is that one of the hurdles that we continue to struggle with?
That's a great question, because I think that that's something I've seen improve in the year. And this might just be personally my classes, and I would love to hear from other students about it, of course. But I personally think at the beginning of the year, that was definitely those 2 days where a lot of tests. Everyone I know had like 4 tests on one day. Somehow it wouldn't even always be spread out on Monday or Tuesday. It seemed like everyone always had their tests on one of those days. But I think what's happened, at least for me, I haven't had a few tests in a while, or at least big tests. I've had, like, say, quizzes that will take up half a block, because I think what teachers have realized is at first they felt the need to do all that testing to make sure that students were at that level. I think a lot of my teachers have now seen the value in having that class period of instruction as opposed to assessment. I've had a couple classes where we, like, say, skipped tests for a unit that we would have done, and instead we've combined 2 units, or we've done a small quiz or a project or something, which I think is definitely better for both ends. For students, it makes it much easier. I haven't had one of those 4 test days in a very long time, definitely not in second semester. And I know that a lot of other classes are kind of doing similar things, which I think is very helpful, because it does seem silly to go into school and have an hour-long block where all you do is take a test on the same material that you've covered for the last week. And it makes sense that when teachers do have tests, they're in person, but I do think that in my personal experience, the teachers have started to see the value in instruction over assessment, specifically on those 2 days. And I've had more creative assessments, I guess. I don't know, like in foreign language, of course, where we do like more listening and speaking and writing, different variety, but I haven't been having as many big tests as I normally would, to answer, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I appreciate it. And that's just kind of the insight. It would be very helpful for me just in that one narrow frame when we talk about how we're changing our operational model and the things that we're learning, whether we're learning some good lessons or difficult lessons. So, Evan, I really appreciate it. I would ask Mr. Vanalia and Dr. Evans if there's an opportunity to circle back with, Mr. Edler and Ms. Andrews, just to see if there's some opportunity to begin thinking about that presentation, and whether, the timeliness of that, what's reasonable, what's practical now or later in the spring. I just want to be sure we don't lose sight of it. I think it could be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bergstrom.
I just have a quick question for Evan. First of all, I just wanted to also thank you and Caroline for how involved and what great advocates you've been. I think that the two proposals that you talked about at the beginning of your report, the interviewing the school committee candidates and the mental health initiatives that you and your classmates are looking at and taking on, are great examples of students really digging in and getting involved in their school and government, and really understanding how student council can be used for more than just holding dances and fundraisers. And I think it's really exciting to see the additional advocacy that you're taking on. So I'm really curious that after those two things happen, if you could bring us back a report on those, and just how those went, what the results were, and what you've all learned from that, because I think that really helps inform us as a school committee too, to understand what students are thinking around those issues, particularly in a pandemic year around the mental health issues, because frequently as adults, we can assess and think about what students need, but it's really interesting to hear from the students themselves what supports are valuable and important to them going forward. So thank you.
Of course, I'll be very happy to update you guys on those events. Also, the student council will be running some mental health related stuff in addition soon. And like Mr. Nixon was saying, I'll be happy to have more input from student council, especially towards the end of the year, about all these different things that we've been working on. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Evan, I bet you didn't expect to have 20 minutes here when it's often only 5. Thank you. I'm glad we could actually make your time valuable if you're going to come. I'm glad we get a little questions. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a lovely day at school. And I'm not going to say goodbye today because I have every hope that I will see you at the meeting in 2 weeks. So I can say goodbye then.
Thank you. My pleasure, as always.
Take care. And as always, you're welcome to hang around or go back to work. So thanks a lot. With that, we will move into public comment. But before public comment, I'd like to remind everyone that it's an opportunity for members of the public to express their opinions on matters under the jurisdiction of the committee. It's not a dialogue, and the committee is under no obligation to respond to comments. As always, I'm going to try to limit public comment to 20 minutes so we have time for discussion. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, but the briefer and more succinct you can be, the more individuals we can hear from. Before we start public comment, I'm going to lower everyone's digital hands and then allow you to raise your digital hands. That way, anybody who didn't raise them right away will have an opportunity to do so. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here and, well, they're all lowered. And I would invite people to raise their digital hands, and we can invite you to our table to provide your comment. So I will elevate Anita Davison. Ms. Davison, if you could state your name and address for the committee, and you should be able to speak now.
Hi, this is Anita Davison, and I'm at 79 Grove Street. I'm the mum of a 3rd and 4th grader at Ambrose Elementary School. I'd like to address today sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes. There are a few things that I'd like to address today. And firstly, I just want to go back. Evan was a wonderful representative for the high school. I thought his presentation was excellent. It's excellent to hear that the high schoolers feel they're doing well and receiving the instruction they require. But I feel like maybe we need some student representatives from the middle school and the elementary schools to speak up and tell you the realities of what school looks like for them and how little they are learning and how they are struggling. My concerns really are that I feel like as a school committee, you guys are elected by the people of this town and the residents. And it feels as though the agenda right now is to protect the health and well-being of our teachers. And whilst I fully understand that that's important, I don't hear very many conversations around what you are doing for the mental health of our children. My daughter is 2 days away from her 10th birthday. We have been having an incredibly difficult time with her. Mental health issues have escalated considerably this year that the kids have been home. And it's really heartbreaking to see. It's affecting our day-to-day life. It's affecting her love of school and learning. It is affecting our home life and the way that we're able to interact with one another as a family. The only support that I receive is through adjustment counsellors at school, and whilst that's great, there is very little opportunity for us to find psychiatric care for our young children at this time. Every single psych ward, every single institution is so full, and it's all children under the age of 10 and 11 years old. I was advised to call a crisis line when we were having some troubles last month, and the only options that were given to me was for my child to be checked into a psychiatric ward for a week. That is unacceptable. I don't think that it's okay that we are only focusing on the health and well-being of our teachers at this time. We need to get our children back to school. Our kids are learning less than 50% of what they should be learning. And I just don't understand why we aren't putting our children's education first. I think that we really need to see a full return to school plan. We'd like to see you representing the town and the children of this town who are really suffering. Sorry. This is like a really emotional time for me. This is incredibly hard. I'm heartbroken for my children. I'm heartbroken for the other children in this town, that there are kids out there who adore going to school, and now they just loathe it. That we have trouble because they leave school on a Friday afternoon after being 2 days in person, and they do not go back until Thursday morning. That is a really difficult thing for kids to handle, especially children who have problems with transitions, to get them to want to go into school. Instead, I'm sitting in the drop-off lane at school for 25 minutes trying to calm my daughter down from an anxiety attack because she's really nervous and scared about going into school, and she doesn't like the fact that she can't even do anything at school. We need to do better. This is not okay, and I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure many of my fellow people in this town would appreciate, just some kind of level of concern for our families and bringing our kids back to school full time. The DESE, the government, everyone's requesting full back to school plans. And my understanding is that you are looking at instantly choosing to go for a waiver to try and avoid returning to school full time. That is not okay, and we need better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davison, for sharing your struggles. I appreciate you telling us. I will elevate Ms. DeLeo. Ms. DeLeo, if you would state your name and address for the committee.
Hi, good morning, Brian. This is Susan DeLeo at 24 Taft Drive. Last week, as we all know, after Governor Baker and DESE's announcement of a possible mandate for schools returning, many schools met that evening, like you guys did, and swiftly ratified their full return to school plan. Here's a list of towns who have returned to school or have concrete plans for a full return for mostly K through 5 within the next few weeks. Melrose, Hanover, Marshfield, Milton, Pembroke, Braintree, Hull, Cohasset, Hingham, Quincy, Duxbury, Weymouth, Kingston, Plymouth, Scituate, Norwell, Rockland, Cambridge, Medfield, Northborough, Southborough, East Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, Weston, Bedford, Middleton, Peabody, Westwood, Brookline, Needham, Danvers, Dedham, North Andover, Stoughton, Andover, Canton, Acton, Boxborough, Bellingham, New Bedford, Concord, Carlisle, Maynard. And there are more towns every single day that are being added to this list. These are just the ones that I could make sure were actually ratified. So, following last week's announcement of a full return mandate on the horizon, I listened into the Winchester School Committee. Unfortunately, I was deeply discouraged and disappointed by the attitudes and the conversations of our school committee members. Instead of being like these other towns who have all said, it will be hard, but we can, I heard a litany of we can'ts. In fact, the only plan I heard to come out of the meeting was to try to apply for a waiver to avoid having to comply with a full return mandate. This was incredibly discouraging, and what a terrible disservice to our children and the residents of Winchester. I appreciate that you have brought together the COVID planning and information team, but we all know committee work is very slow. Why can we not activate the plan for return to schools that you've prepared for this coming fall, as you've advertised to the school community? Surely the school committee had planned for a scenario where nothing was different than it is today. Did they not? Finally, I leave you with the plan put forth by the Marblehead superintendent. Quote, we have diligently been looking at space. We have been reutilizing classrooms in the building to allow for more space. Currently, 14 class lists have greater than 20 students in them. For 5th and 6th grade, that means a team of 40 or greater. We will move teachers and students so that students who are in class of greater than 20 have larger classrooms in the building. This means students in grade 6 will be in the hallway, 4th grade classes or 5th grade classes will be in the 6th grade hallway, etc. Areas such as the auditorium and the band room have been used for shared teaching and shared remote tutor space. These may now be reassigned as primary classrooms. The physical space will be reimagined. Teacher desks will be removed from classrooms to allow for more space for our students' desks. Bookshelves will be moved into hallways. Students may be close to the whiteboard or up against a wall to maximize space. Thinking creatively about this, we may look at students bringing their own devices. This is what we are looking for as residents of Winchester. We are looking for someone to figure out how we can, instead of constantly and incessantly speaking about how we can't. Education of our students is imperative, and we need to get down to the work of getting it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeLeo. Appreciate your comments. Seeing no additional requests for public comment, I see one more. I will elevate Ms. Hoffman. Ms. Hoffman, if you will state your name and address for the committee.
Fairlane Terrace. I just wanted to sort of say that I wasn't really happy last week when I heard about the waiver. You know, like Ms. DeLeo said and Ms. Davison, we really need to try and work out a space where we can put these kids and not just come up with excuses to put in the waiver to say why we can't do something to bring our kids K-5 back. I've heard through from elementary teachers that before the February break, they were going through the standards that they'd done back in August. They had to green light, traffic light it, basically green light, yellow light, red light on what standards they were supposed to teach the kids this year. And from my understanding is that they have barely hit any of the green light standards that they were supposed to teach this year. I find that really disgusting, and it's not on the teacher's part, but we need to get these kids back in the classroom so they can learn more things for their social emotional health and for them academically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. I will elevate, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Ms. Dakelski. You can state your name and address for the committee.
Thanks. Lori Stachowski.
Thank you. My apologies.
No problem. Everyone gets it wrong. So I'm at 22 St. Thomas More Drive. Thanks for taking these comments. Just in support of what the other women have said, and hopefully representing, I think, the vast majority of Winchester residents who have kids in elementary school. I guess I'm just really, really disappointed at the state of play right now in Winchester and the actions of the school committee. I think, requesting a waiver when, every single government official, so from the former president to our current president to the governor to DESE, every single person believes these elementary school kids need to be back in school 5 days. And, they've changed the requirements to make that easier. We've had literally no issues of mass spread in schools. And I just, for the life of me, do not understand why Winchester thinks this is the time to be different in a negative way and hurt the education, not just this year, but for decades to come for all of these kids who want to be learning and want to keep Winchester public schools excellent. There is no way that all these other towns have more resources and more ability to get the kids back in school than Winchester does. So if it requires, you guys having a vote to reallocate dollars and hire more teachers or get temporary facilities, be creative, but asking for a waiver and just thinking it's okay to have these young kids continue to go to school 2 days a week, barely learning the minimum requirements for their grade level is just so unacceptable. And I know that countless of parents feel this way. We have all spoken about it. It is unacceptable. We're willing to be helpful to you, but we listen to these school committee meetings and it's like, you don't even want to try. And we don't understand that. There's teachers that want to be back in the classroom, so hire the teachers that want to be back in the classroom, do the remote for the people who don't want to go in person, and make it happen. But enough is enough. We've had a year of this. It is time to get the kids back in school. What is the reason Winchester does not want to do this? When we have literally, how many towns did the other woman list? Dozens of towns. Dorchester is making it work. Every other town seems to be making this work other than Winchester. And we pay some of the highest taxes in this whole area. The elementary schools used to be ranked #1 in the state. They're going to be 0 at the end of this. So I just implore you, and as residents, we are willing to be helpful. We'll do whatever we need to do to get the kids back in school, but please do not be the obstacle. Please be a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to elevate Rebecca Sliz, if you would state your name and address for the committee.
Hi, this is Rebecca Sliz. I live at 2 Watson Place, and I was just able to join. And I've heard, a lot of criticism, and I just wanted to say that I get a little concerned when people are speaking for, the majority of Winchester. I think it's fine if you speak as an individual, and the passion and the concern is definitely there. I think if we're also trying to, teach our children respect and civility and understanding and kindness, I would just ask that there be a little more generosity given to the school committee. I think what I've been saying to my children who are elementary school age for the last year is we are all doing the best we can. We are doing the best we can. And I understand that there are individuals who may feel that that's not the case, and that you are trying to be constructive. But I just wanted to be a voice of support for the efforts that the school committee and the administration has been making, and to encourage people to dialogue in a respectful way. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments. And seeing no additional comments, I will close public comment. I we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is report and discussion items. We have some guests who need to be elevated. The first discussion item is to provide the committee with information regarding DCFS, direct current fast chargers or fast charging EV stations. And Ms. Bolognese, I would love assistance to elevate the 4 members of the Climate Action Advisory Committee, as well as our town planner, if we can find them.
I got 2, Mr. Brunelia, but I might have missed.
I'm trying to. I don't see Mr. Skleski here. I don't know if he was planning on coming. And I see Mr. Pruitt. So let's promote to panelist. Let's see. I just want to see. I don't know if no, it looks like Mr. Selesky is not here. So welcome. Just a little background before we kick this off. Ms. Trimarchi, Mr. Pruitt, and Mr. Chen have been researching possible installations of DCFS or direct current fast charger fast EV stations at Skilling's Field parking lot. And they're coming to give a presentation to us for us to consider locating some at the high school parking lot. If Ms. Trimarchi, Mr. Pruitt, and Mr. Chen, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, and you should have the ability to give your presentation. I've given all panelists the ability to share. So if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can kick in the presentation.
Good morning. I'll jump in since I'm the chair, and then my colleagues can as well. Good morning to the school committee. My name's Ruth Trimarchi, chair of the Climate Action Advisory Committee. Thank you for having us here this morning. And I wanted to acknowledge our previous 2 conversations and how important those are. The young student, Evan, whose last name I don't know, as a veteran teacher of 13 years, I know how hard those students work when they come to the school committee and represent you for the students for 3 years. He's extremely articulate, and as a member of the community, I congratulate him on his service. And our parents who are speaking, I want to acknowledge that conversation and how hard that is as well. We're shifting gears to a very technical conversation here. So without further ado, why don't in order here, Wei Chen, would you like to introduce yourself? And then
my name is Wei Chen. So I work as a software engineer. I also work for the Climate Action Advisory Board committee to help with promote EV adoption in the town. Thank you.
Morning.
And hi, my name is Ken Pruitt. I'm a Winchester resident. I work in the town of Arlington as their energy manager, and in that role, I am involved with electric vehicle charging station projects there. I helped write Winchester's climate action plan, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. And you can feel free to share your presentation if you're able to.
Yes, I will be able to do that. And let's see, down the bottom here should be share screen. And let's take, and apologies with a little bit of background noise for our granddaughter and our pets, and it's a real household here, okay?
We like kids.
I thought the school committee might not be too bad with that. So yes, we're here to talk about high-speed electric vehicle chargers. There we go. And I'm here to just frame the conversation for you and to let you know the general background of this. My colleagues here are present to answer some technical questions. Mr. Zakelli, the town planner, is the person who will be actually submitting this grant while we're doing the work for it. So he may or may not pop on this morning, but I assure you he is deeply involved in this. So why are we here before you? Because as the 2020 Climate Action Plan that we collectively as a team of 26 people wrote and the select board adopted last summer, and town meeting adopted as well, indicates that 36% of total carbon pollution in Winchester is due to transportation. The other roughly 60% is due to buildings, and then there's some solid waste and other things. So we're trying to encourage reduction of fossil fuel vehicles by encouraging and facilitating an additional development of the infrastructure so that we have easily accessible and visible spots that will encourage people that if they do invest in an electric vehicle, not only can they charge at home, but that the town is continuing to build the infrastructure so if they're out, they can get a fast charge. What we're calling EVIP, for pronunciation, the EVIP grant will allow Winchester to continue to build that infrastructure. And when we spoke to the select board 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, they authorized 2 potential locations, and we'd like to explain to you why head and shoulders, far and away, this one that we're appealing to you for is the best for the town. So a little bit of background on the grant. It's a Department of Environmental Protection. The grant, and it's called Electric Vehicle Incentive Program, EVIP. Unlike most grants, this is going to cover 100% of the hardware as well as installation for what are called DCFCs, direct current fast charging stations, if they're on government-owned property. If they're on, like we, believe me, Mr. Zucchelli and all of us went all over this town, all over maps in multiple forms, including Google Earth, looking at every single parking spot in town and drawing up the list of possibilities. This is on government-owned property, which really is the big advantage, as well as several other points we're going to bring up. These chargers will give you a full charge in 30 to 60 minutes. The grant is up to $50,000 per station. And there's been a lot of research already put into this, hours by our team, many hours. And one of the key, we have quotes from vendors, and the conversations with Eversource are critical to being able to make this happen. They will pay the additional $25K that's needed above and beyond the $50K to do the installation. And the grant's due in March 19th. Thank you for bringing us on. And I know it was short notice to the school committee. This came out from the state in the middle of March. It's due the middle of January. Across my desk came out from the state then in short turnaround. So why is this location option number 1 in the Skillingsfield parking lot? Because it's accessible to the high school, to the sports fields, to the grocery store, and it's close enough to walk to downtown. It has high visibility. And one of the goals of putting these stations in is to encourage people by virtue of seeing the stations that they exist and they can use them. Here's a critical point for this particular spot. It's in an environmental justice neighborhood, EJ neighborhood. That EJ neighborhood ends at that railroad station. If anyone cares to see that map, it's in one of the references that I brought to you. And it goes sort of west and north from there. It's important because we want to bring services to underserved neighborhoods. That's why they're called environmental justice neighborhoods. It also means that we get a point from the state on this particular grant, which makes it highly more likely that Winchester would receive this grant instead of going through all this work and not receiving the grant. So this is the only spot in town that we could locate with the town planner that's in an EJ neighborhood. It's scalable. Governor Baker has said by 2035, all new cars sold in Massachusetts must be electric. Obviously, that means that municipalities are not going to do nothing and then suddenly build the infrastructure in 2035. It's a slope. Because of that, the state is really pushing these grants, which is, it's an advantage for everyone. It's not going to be here forever. This lot is also preferred by Eversource because of the cheaper installation costs. If they look at a site which requires a lot of trenching or NOIs from the Conservation Commission because they're right next to a river or whatever, they simply say, we'll go to the next town. We're not going to invest here. These are the locations we're looking at, and I draw your attention to these little green boxes called transformers and where they are relative to this area of the parking lot. I have a photo here that shows the existing level 2 EV chargers at the town and at the high school. And in particular, this sign here that notes that staff only can park there during school hours and the public is limited to a 2-hour limit. So the DCFCs would have comparable signage for those, indicating that they are for student use only during school hours. This is what they look like. This is one particular brand. It looks a little bit like a Jetsons era kind of thing to me, but there are many different types of these. This is an example of one. I have this photo here just to remind you that ADA space requirements have to be lateral to the vehicle. Yes, some vehicles will allow a ramp to be put out in the back, but predominantly when you're talking about a driver who has mobility issues and these type of vans, you're looking for access on the side. I have a more specific example. This is not in your packet. We came up with this morning because we realized it was a better representation of the spacing that would be required for this particular lot. So this is the type of charger you'd be looking at, and there'd be some asphalt painted on the asphalt there. One single vehicle would be driving in here, allowing access left and right for ADA accessibility because vans open differently and cars open differently. Only one of the 2 spots has to be ADA accessible. So to your right is where the second charger would go, and that would not need to have one of those stippled ADA accessible stripes to the right of it. So the total distance there is 26 feet that we are asking for. 3 feet of ADA, 10 feet for a vehicle, 3 feet on this side for an ADA, and then another 10 feet. Totals 26 feet that we're asking for. This is for Mr. Nixon and other folks here who like to squint at little print plans with lots of little tiny print and for anyone else who cares to dig in. I'm not going to read you all of that. I'm going to point out instead that up close, this is what these transformer boxes look like. And we're all familiar with them. Let me go back there and just note, these do require a concrete pad, which is why they are, you cannot put them just anywhere. You can't, for instance, have parking and then have this on the sidewalks. So people have asked, why can't we put it here or there? You need to have a grassy area or an accessible area in front of where the vehicles are, accessing either existing transformers or space to put a new such transformer in. Otherwise, you'd have to take out another parking spot and put it off to the side, which nobody wants. So here's the CIAC ask of the school committee this morning to authorize conversion of 2 parking spots at the Skillingsfield parking lot for use by EV vehicles, electric vehicles, accessing 2 DCFC charging stations. We want to clarify that that actually means we would need 3 spaces because of the ADA requirements for this grant. So this would convert 2 fossil fuel spots to EV spots with the loss of 1 additional spot for ADA requirements. The transformer for a DCFC, which is larger than the level 2s that you have there now, is 6 feet by 6 feet, and it has to be located close to the parking spots. So Eversource may be able to utilize the existing transformer, or they may have to put in an additional one close by. We're not sure of that point yet, but and I'm going to stop there. Those are your references. I will invite questions. Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Before I open it up to questions, I just have a clarifying question. Would one of the spots would be ADA compliant and one would not be? Would that ADA compliant also be limited to, would it be tagged as like handicap only parking, or would it, so it's, it would be open to any parker who is using that, regardless of whether they needed the space? Needed the ADA space.
That is my understanding, and Ken or Wei, you can confirm that. But that, yes, the point is to have one of these high-speed chargers accessible to our community that needs it, those with all mobility issues.
Okay. But not limited to is what that's all I just wanted to
I
understand.
understand your question, and
Yep.
Ken, I'm just asking
That's
you.
correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Yep.
Thank you so much. So I would open up to questions or comments from the committee. Ms. Marchant?
Is the school superintendent prepared to give us feedback on this presentation, her point of view, or is this something for a future meeting?
We certainly welcome superintendent's perspective. We can go in either order, either questions, or I can turn to the superintendent right away. And I will go to the superintendent and ask her thoughts since you asked. I would have asked it eventually, but thank you.
Sure. I just want to reiterate that the Skilling's lot is school property and is subject to the control of the school committee in terms of approving this. And so it's not my decision about whether this goes in. This is a school committee decision. I have conferred with the high school principal about the existing charging stations on the high school property. And we installed those, even though there were some significant drawbacks to installing them in terms of losing other parking spaces or the potential for losing parking spaces. So the feedback from the principal about this is as follows. Unfortunately, many of the folks who use the charging stations don't pay attention to the limits on time and use it for their own personal parking space. And then it might snow or have other ice issues. And then it's really hard for us to plow around it. I know technically we could probably tow cars that are parked there, but I just think it's important for everyone to recognize that it does sometimes present some challenges for us. The other issue with Skilling's is obviously every parking space that we lose is another car, student car or a sports spectator car that's kind of forced out onto the road somewhere. And so, losing another space is concerning. Although if the charging stations are posted as student use during the day, I think that would somewhat address that concern. The other concern I have is that 80% of our students in a typical year participate in sports or co-curricular activities after school. So my concern is a student car is going to go in that spot and stay there till sometimes late at night. So in general, while we are incredibly concerned about climate change, very much in favor of electronic vehicles and charging stations, we're not sure that's the best spot for these charging stations for the reasons I've just enumerated. And I think school properties in general are not good spots for chargers because the intent is that they're short term. Every 2 hours, you turn it over, you have more accessibility. And at least on school days, for all practical purposes, it'll be completely inaccessible to someone with an electric car who's not already a student. So for those reasons, I would recommend against it, but I'll certainly defer to the school committee in terms of your decisions. We will abide by whatever you decide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. Before I get to you, Mr. Nixon, I wanted to recognize Mr. Pruitt, who had raised his hand as well. Mr. Pruitt.
Thank you. Just to clarify something, I think there's flexibility in terms of what rules are applied to these parking spaces during the day. And I think it would certainly be up to the school committee to establish these rules, but in conversations that we have had amongst, Ruth and Wei and I think should this move forward, we would recommend that students and staff be able to park in these spaces during school hours without limitations, so that there would be no loss of spaces for parking unless you assume that essentially no students or staff would have electric vehicles.
Ken, I'm so sorry.
I don't rule out.
Ken, Ruth, there's an echo. Can you put yourself on mute when others are talking? It creates an. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Zena. So during the day, I think in being mindful of the concern about losing any parking spaces, I think we would recommend, again, if this did move forward, that students and staff could park without limitation during all school hours, and that it would only open up to people outside of students and staff when school is not in session. I think the real issue in terms of, well, so back to this issue of sort of how many people have EVs, as Ruth was mentioning, and this is something that I sort of study on a daily basis in my work in Arlington. Electric vehicles, although they're only about 2% of sales currently, are projected to ramp up in hockey stick fashion very quickly. Ruth mentioned that under the state's plans currently, they want to see nothing but electric vehicles sold in the state as early as 2035, with 1 million electric vehicles on the roads by 2030. So I think even if the number of electric vehicles among students and staff is currently low, essentially all predictors are that that's going to change pretty quickly. So in fact, there will be competition amongst EV drivers, I think, to park in these spaces. Just one other quick thing about why this particular project is so important. As we've been discussing, there are already a couple of EV charging stations at the main high school lot next to the building. The reason these are different and important is that they are these direct current fast chargers. They can charge vehicles 10 times or more faster than a regular level 2 charger of the kind that you see around town. And this is something that's highly attractive. It provides an opportunity for people to have more of a gas station type of experience to charge their EVs, whereas current electric vehicle chargers of the level 2 variety might take 8 hours to charge an electric vehicle all the way up. You can do it in 30 to 60 minutes with a DC fast charger. And this provides a real opportunity for people in multifamily housing and other situations where they need a rapid charge, and the ability to get a rapid charge will help them transition to being able to own an electric vehicle, whereas they otherwise wouldn't be. And in addition, because these stations charge so quickly, they're very expensive. They can be up to close to $50,000 to purchase. So this is really an unprecedented state grant program to be able to pay 100% of the cost of these very expensive DC fast charging stations. And so that's why we wanted to go after it. I think these stations would be, in our opinion, a real asset to students and teachers with EVs. Certainly there's countervailing drawbacks. And I think one of the biggest ones is, in fact, that there'd be a net loss of 1 parking space due to the ADA space requirements. And that's certainly nothing to sneeze at, but I just wanted to give those additional points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just had a website up that I was going to share. There we go.
You should be able to do so.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to say, Mr. Markey was absolutely correct. So it's a little bit unusual here when we talk about an accessible space, but then it's actually not dedicated to or restricted to ADA use. So this is directly from the Mass DEP's Mass EVIP sort of FAQ page. There's a good section here on accessibility. The last one you'll note is accessible EV charging stations may be used by any employees, and we would extend to that, I presume, students, and must not be reserved for employees with disabilities. Therefore, do not install markings or signage restricting the space to ADA accessibility only. However, it still does need to be physically accessible. And you saw some of the diagrams there in Ruth's presentation today. And that involves things like the slope along the length of the space, cross slope, and so forth. I wanted to share one concern I have. I'll pull this up. Hopefully you guys can see this. So from Google Maps. So this is the area here I'm showing in, with my cursor that this group has identified as prime candidates for EV charging stations. So what I just wanted to share, a concern I have is that even at the brand new Winchester High School, which was $129 million fantastic facility, we subsequently found some significant ADA violations, including on the site itself in the parking fields. And that's with a team of architects and engineers. So nobody's perfect, but we now find ourselves under an obligation to address these citations. ADA is more than just a guideline. It is civil rights law. And so seeing the note that our utility company would look towards locating these in an area where the cost is as low as possible, and I appreciate they're willing to kick in some extra money. What I would point out to the committee and to Ruth and your team is that, so here we have some available power on site today with these transformer pads, but the way Skilling's field lot is designed to shed water towards, here's one catch basin as an example. There's actually quite a lot of pitch here. And without just a simple spirit level would show that many of these spaces are more than double the allowable cross slope. So a concern I certainly would have is that we don't do a good thing badly, as I'm fond of saying. I totally support the idea. I understand what's behind it. And I've reviewed the 2030 Climate Action Plan, which actually has some really bold ideas that are going to impact our schools in ways we can hardly imagine. But I would be concerned that we approve something and then find that it's installed in a way that creates an ADA violation. I do think that perhaps there's a space or two that might work, but it would carefully require a surveyor to go out and sort of verify the site condition. And then I had some questions too, just on the cost piece. I know the grant covers things like the charging and the infrastructure itself and some of the hardware. Given some of the requirements for a wheelchair ramp and an accessible route, would that be covered by the grant? Do you have a sense, and you may not, whether the grant covers sort of all the cost of doing this, or would the town be on the hook for something? My suggestion, just because I want to be sure that we don't find ourselves with an ADA violation, that we take some time to really study this, and that like a specific plan basically be brought forward where we can understand someone's looked at it and measured it and signed off on it. And we can be confident that we've sort of done our job from a due diligence point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I'm curious, help me, was that a question of Ms. Trimarchi or was it just a suggestion?
Well, as Ruth said at the beginning, this is a very technical presentation. So I think there's sort of two pieces to this. One is you're sort of sharing with the committee what it is you'd like to accomplish. And I can appreciate that, and I'm generally supportive of it. But at a technical level, I'm not comfortable approving something until I know like exactly where it's going to go and that someone has actually looked at that and done the appropriate measurements and can sort of certify that it's going to be ADA compliant. So that last part is not really a question so much as sort of outlining an expectation. I appreciate though sort of where this is coming from. I guess I do have a question on the grant piece though, Mr. Chairman. Yes. Does the grant cover all of the costs associated with the work outside of the charging station, the conduit, the pad and so forth, or is it really primarily for the electrical infrastructure?
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Trimarchi or someone else?
I'll just make a general comment, and I think one of my two colleagues or both will have better answers to that. Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I appreciate the additional focus on the ADA piece of that. And I am not sure if we are going to be able to get that answer on that specific thing before we have to submit this grant. It's a really short turnaround time. I'm going to call on Ken to jump in and say a little bit more about whether we can get that info.
Right. Just so first on the what is covered by the Eversource versus the EVIP grant. Between the two of them, they covered just about everything. I think what I've heard is that the paint might not be covered, actually just repainting the spaces, but essentially everything else would be covered. I think in terms of the kind of more detailed analysis that would need to go into whether a particular spot is appropriate in every possible way, including whether it would meet the ADA requirements. What a lot of applicants I think are doing with these, because of the very short application deadline, is to agree essentially on what appears to be a good location for these chargers, submit an application, and then finish the analysis of whether the station would in fact be, whether the particular space does make perfect sense. If something is uncovered after the application is submitted that would indicate it actually wouldn't make sense, then you simply decline funding if the DEP were to grant it. So we would have a number of months after the application to make those determinations and react.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pruitt. Ms. Marchant.
Thank you, Mr. Vernalia. First of all, I want to thank the Climate Action Planning Committee, the one that wrote the plan. I was very honored to be a member on behalf of the school committee. And from what I learned, my family took 2 fossil fuel cars and substituted it for 1 electric vehicle. And so we've been converted. But I want to, the key, I want to take issue with the idea that putting it at the high school helps us achieve some sort of equity. Electric vehicles are very expensive at this time. And rather to spin the equity issue as this isn't really equitable for the high school. The high school, and I'm very sensitive to the burden that has been placed on our schools by the pandemic. So that's where I'm coming from. To add yet another thing into our property and another cost that could come at the price of 1 prime parking spot, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that maybe Mr. Zacchelli, I wish, and you would be able to answer this also, but why didn't you consider the library lot or the town lot near the Jenks or other town property outside of the schools? I don't want to hear that it's I forget the name, the equity title you had. I want to know why those other lots, which is where I would prefer to see this rather than in the high school lot. So I want to push back a little bit because of the cost of EVs right now, and the cost that it actually adds, and not like financial costs, but other kinds of costs to our school district that has already seen, as you heard some of the parents' conversations today. I mean, we've really been through a lot. And so I don't think that this is necessarily equitable to add this to the schools in our, in our town.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. I will call on Ms. Trimarchi. I just want to remind the committee, not that I'm not pointing this out, our decision is whether we want to put it at the school or not. We don't actually get any say over where another spot, although I do appreciate that another spot in town could be a better spot, but that wouldn't be our call is all I wanted to remind you. Ms. Trimarchi.
Thank you, and I'll make a general comment. And again, Mr. Chen or Mr. Pruitt may want to add more, which is that, and it's great to see you, Zena, and thank you so much for all of the work that you did on the Climate Action Plan. It was so much appreciated, and your attention in particular to equity issues, the sometimes called EJ or environmental justice. And that EJ neighborhood is not something that we determine. It's of course a state, it's an overlay on our map. And yes, we looked at every single possible parking spot in this town. And yes, there are some which we can also look to, but this is the number one for a whole host of technical and other reasons. Eventually, we would like, for example, to put them at Stop and Shop, and that would necessitate, of course, a corporate level decision, which we cannot turn around by, even if we started in January, as soon as we got it, that's, a ways into the distance. Again, the hospital is a likely spot that would be usable by a high throughput kind of clientele. And there are 3 spots there between their cancer facility, the main hospital, and their satellite parking spot. We looked extensively at downtown, of course, and the merchants there will, I think I'd be run out of town, quite frankly, but I may be run out of town speaking to the school committee this morning. But we did look at every potential spot. there are a host of reasons. Ken, do you want to, or Wei, jump in and say more about this equity issue or the technical issues?
I think, I mean, you said everything quite well, Ruth. I'd just very briefly note that there are different ways to look at equity and environmental justice. In the case of the reason DEP gives you extra points to locate charging stations within neighborhoods that have been designated as environmental justice neighborhoods, in this particular case, it has to do with essentially ensuring that electric vehicle charging stations, especially these much more rare, valuable DC fast charging stations, don't only end up in neighborhoods where, you know, there's people of means who already have EVs, but provide opportunities for lower income neighborhoods to be able to access, you know, easily access nearby charging stations. And while it's true, certainly, you know, new EVs cost quite a bit, the prices are coming down. And almost more importantly, because EVs have now been around for a while, there's starting to be a robust used EV market. And so it's becoming more and more possible for almost anyone to get an EV. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to add that if I understand Zina correctly, that this won't add to the cost to the school, because we plan to make it it's not free charging. People need to pay per kilowatt hour in order to charge there. But the revenue we get from there is just to cover the ongoing costs, like the maintenance and the electricity charge, so that we won't be need to pay anything for these chargers for the years to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Ms. Bolognese?
Thank you very much. I had a couple of questions. These might be more for Dr. Evans, but I was just wondering, how full is our high school parking lot on a given day?
Well, I think this is an unusual year because of the lack of complete participation in sports and activities.
In a typical year.
Which would demonstrate variance from day to day. The parking lots are always completely full.
Okay.
Both lots. Yeah, I think Mr. Nixon can attest to that, having had kids at the high school driving. And the nearby roads are full too. And so, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, particularly this year when we're not providing any transportation to the high school, that those are highly coveted spots at Skillings. And there are not enough spaces there to meet our needs. And by design, just to be clear, there aren't enough spaces at the high school itself or the adjoining lot to accommodate everybody who would like to drive there. And so that's the reality of where we built the high school and some of the choices that we've made.
Okay, and then you had mentioned the current chargers that are in place there, which I can visualize. But how much are those spaces used as well on a given day, or are they used also as charging spaces?
Yes, we do have some employees with EVs, including actually our middle school principal just bought one. So I think there are some converts out there. The problem is that with so few spaces, there's competition obviously for who gets there first. The spaces are used by other cars at other times as well. But what Mr. Mahoney's concern is we really don't have the capacity to police them to see how quickly they're turning over, whether people are using them appropriately. They are, to be frank, neighbors are parking there and just leaving their cars there. And it's problematic because then snow removal is an issue. So there may be someone who doesn't need it on a daily basis and can take the train. They leave their car there for a few days. You have to plow around it. It just becomes very problematic. So we just don't have the capacity to police the use of these spaces. But I would suspect that if you put these in Skillings on non-school days, they could get used by people in the community, and that would be a great use for them. But on school days, I think there'll be a student car there from morning till night, and they won't get any use by anybody to charge. So that's just my speculation.
And the new DCFCs, it's not the idea to like exchange out the current chargers that are in place. This would be in addition, in a separate spot. Okay. And then, okay, that's it for the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Bolognese. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time because I know we have a long agenda, but I want to give this the thorough discussion it deserves. So, Ms. Bergstrom.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I wanted to also just say that while in principle, I support being able to add electric vehicle charging stations around town. I think having them available will only encourage more people to purchase electric vehicles because access to these charging stations, it can be one barrier for people. I do have a different equity concern of a bit, which is that by putting these in a student lot, particularly in spaces that are closer to the building, we're prioritizing students and families who can afford these, and that do have electric vehicles at home for parking in these spaces. So that would be a concern for me as well that I think we'd have to think about and address. And Dr. Evans, I have a question for you about how we can enforce student or staff only parking in these spots if these are the kind of charging stations that are supposed to turn over every 30 minutes. And then Ms. Trimarchi, for you as well, how the team is valuing this as the most premium spot when you can anticipate losing 180 days a year of public parking in these spots. So if this is a space that's supposed to turn over every 30 minutes and be a high throughput space for people in the town to be able to charge quickly and move on, but I would have to say, you know, as a school committee member, I would have to restrict the 180 days of school usage to students and staff only, particularly since this is an athletic field. So it's not even just the 7 to 3 school day, but it would be the, 7 to 8 or 9 p.m. use of Skilling's Field by our athletic teams as well, when those lots are full, clear through to the evening, as somebody else said, in a typical year. So I would see these spots primarily being used by the rest of the residents in town as summers and weekends only. So I'm curious as to why that makes this a premium location. So Dr. Evans, how will we enforce student and staff only? And Ms. Trimarchi, knowing you're going to lose 180 days a year, how does that make this a premium spot? Thanks.
Sure, I'll respond quickly. We're not able to police it in any way during the school day. If there's a neighborhood car there that's left there, it's left there, and it's frustrating for us. So it is difficult for us to police. And I would affirm, and maybe I wasn't as clear in the beginning, I 100% agree with you that there's not going to be turnover in these spots. Teachers and students don't have the capacity to go out during the day and move cars and find another space. And so it could be there from early morning till late at night. And so for that reason, I think it's probably not the best place for it. But no capacity to police at this time. And I'll let Mr. Markey address the second one about why this is a priority spot.
Yes, we do not expect the school to be policing this at all. And certainly during school hours, and I think the other signs at 7:30 to 3:30, I understand that this is close to the sporting field, so it might, in the committee's mind, get a little blurry about what's exactly our school hours. But during those school hours, we're totally aware and expect that a student might arrive first thing in the morning and not leave until the end of the day. That was a compromise that our team came to in looking at again, it's a very technical grant, very complicated grant. We had to weigh pluses and minuses of many sorts. And if you get a big kind of algorithm going, this is the spot which is most desirable given all of those pieces. So it would look at, we understand that the rest of non-students would be looking at charging there in the evenings, I would assume, and also mostly weekends and summers and vacations. But yeah, there would be a loss there. And it looks like you might have had a follow-up there, Michelle, or maybe one of my other colleagues would like to jump in.
I think that, sorry, Mr. Pruitt. I saw that Mr. Nixon has his hand raised. But Mr. Pruitt first.
Oh, okay. Can I just clarify something? So I think we had assumed that school hours would end, at roughly 3 p.m. and that these chargers could be open to the public even on school days after that. If it would be helpful to know whether that is the case or not. If this lot needs to remain exclusively for use of students and staff after 3 o'clock and into the evening. Well, I won't say more, but can that be clarified? Is that knowable at this moment?
I would defer to Dr. Evans, but I would start by saying I'm sure there is a multitude of opinions on that matter among committee members. So I would defer to Dr. Evans, but it would be ultimately up to the committee to decide how to signage for those particular spots. But as it's practically used now, I would defer to Dr. Evans.
Sure. So again, it really varies by season. But as I said, 80% of our 1,450 students play a sport or participate in a club or activity. It's highly likely that a student would put a car there at the beginning of the day and may not remove it until late at night. And we have no way to kind of police that. This is sort of first come, first served parking. These are not assigned spaces. And so similarly, when our students are not using those spaces, it's going to be at a premium for community members to use it as other people use those fields as well. So for some seasons of the year, those parking spaces, once a student leaves, will be taken over by somebody else using the athletic fields. And so it's not a high turnover lot in terms of having a lot of students leaving right after school. They keep their cars there. If you drive by there during a normal year, late at night, there'll still be a lot of cars there. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. And I just would reiterate that how it's being used now and how it could potentially be used are two different matters. It would be up to the committee to decide what the signage for that lot was. I will just volunteer that as I drive past the lot at the end of school, there are a large number of students leaving the lot at that time. So there certainly is turnover at the end of the school day. But for those student athletes, I guess what Dr. Evans said is pretty clear that there will be some students who would stay through the evening, and whether or not the loss of 3 parking spaces would impact that would be something that the committee would have to consider. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you. And just to clarify this point, we're not talking about students who might be on the baseball or softball team, and so they're coming over to the field for practice, but we're talking about all athletes, because some of them get on a bus and they go to practice off-site and then they come back. Two additional things one additional note I had forgotten to make earlier, and then I have maybe a suggestion, a question and a suggestion for Ruth and her team to consider. I've also just forgot to mention that there is some encumbrance on this field through Mass DEP, since we know there were some contaminated soils on site associated with the culvert project. I can't imagine it would preclude us from doing something like this. We do have, for instance, the transformers on site, but everything that's there is considered part of the protective cap. And I think my understanding is any kind of work that requires a shovel in the ground requires some notification and some elements of process with the Department of Environmental Protection. So again, I don't think that makes it a non-starter, but it's an element to be aware of in the process. What I wanted to maybe reflect back on is I saw this committee's presentation at the Select Board on February 8th, and my understanding is that there are really kind of 4 spots in play, 2 here at Skillings, and you also separately were looking for permission from the Select Board to install 2 on Shore Road. Is that right?
Yes, they authorized those 2 general areas. We are looking at, we have a list of others that, down the line we would get to. But again, this one is head and shoulders for many reasons the best. And I appreciate all the committee's questions. Good.
So I thank you for that. I suppose, given some of the concerns that I'm hearing from the committee, and one of your earlier slides talked about this being some of the locations you've identified are encouraging to you because they are, we call, as you put it, scalable. Looking at this area of Skillings, looking at the slope on the lot, the concerns about kind of the day-to-day use and the priority for students, I can't help but wonder, thinking about just bang for the buck and how a community might be encouraged to more readily adopt zero emission vehicles. Is an alternative for you all to just look at doing 4 spaces on Shore Road? And I'm thinking a benefit of that might be, if I have an EV and I go to any location in town where there are 4 spots instead of 2, I think I'm more likely to find that there's an open spot for charging, and I'm going to be more encouraged then to do that. I might be more frustrated if I'm looking for, I mean, I have to hope that there's no more than 2 cars there charging, or else I have to go find a spot elsewhere. Shore Road, I would say, not that I've been out there with a level, but I mean, it's certainly much more flat than these areas that you're looking at on Skillings. And so I have less concern about the potential for ADA violations at Shore Road as well. And of course, it's very central, right? Very, very convenient still to the high school and the center business district. I would encourage you all to really consider that. And it seems to me if for whatever reason, this really became more difficult for the school committee and administration to support, you could still take advantage of these EVIP grants and find a way to get 4 spots, even if it just means doubling what you're seeking to do on Shore Road. Is that right?
Ms. Tremarchi.
My colleague can answer that. But yeah, it gets into NOIs and the COMCOM. Ken, you want to pick that up?
I guess I would just say 2 things. One is we looked really hard at Shore Road with Eversource, and they unfortunately said they could not do a project there. They have to have a sufficient electrical service in close proximity to where a DC fast charging station would go in to make it viable. And they basically said they took a look at it. We asked them to take a look at it, and they said, sorry, we can't do this location. It's not necessarily the end of the road. There is one more place we're looking at, which is the Jenks lot. So there is the potential there. And I think as we go through this process, if we determine that there are some significant barriers to doing it there, but if those barriers fall away as we do this research, I think we would certainly apply for that location. But it's a very difficult game of Tetris trying to find a place that would meet the grant requirements, have a chance of winning, and where Eversource already has their infrastructure. Why did I stop there? I was going to say something else, but I'll just let it go. Thank you,
Mr. Pruitt. So, Ms. Tremarchi, I have a couple of questions. If these went in Skillings as described, you mentioned scalable. Does that mean that at some point down the road, for a smaller cost than what you're doing, you could put in additional stations in the same location, or would it require significant infrastructure improvements at that time? Say we wanted to make it go to 4 or 6. Is it scalable in that way somehow?
And why don't you handle that one?
Yeah, the scalability issue has more to do with this Eversource issue that I was mentioning. Making sure that the electrical infrastructure is there is a really big percentage of the overall cost of putting in a DC fast charging station. So essentially, once you've put in 1 station, or in this case 2, it's incrementally a lot less expensive to put in the next one and the next one, the next one.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm pleased to hear that, because we will find that we have electric cars coming to the high school more and more over the next decade. And I'm aware of all the concerns. At the same time, getting someone to do some of the heavy lifting so that we could at some point in the future as a town decide to scale this up as a direct benefit for our staff and students feels like a strong positive for me. So I'm generally supportive of this. I have an additional question regarding really your timing, Ms. Tremarchi. So the grant is due, if I'm correct, on the 19th. And we knew this was all going to be tight when we scheduled this meeting. Certainly there are a lot, it appears there are a lot of outstanding issues among committee members, which may simply mean that we can't effectively move forward with this. I have sort of two options at my disposal. I can either request that we suspend our rules and vote today, which would give you surety of either, yes, you can move ahead with this spot, or no, you can't move ahead with this spot. Or I could schedule a vote on our 16th, and individual committee members could reach out to you with any questions. It would give you less surety, but it might enable committee members who are uncertain the opportunity to move forward. I expect the 16th to be a lengthy meeting, so I don't think we'll have time to have a thorough discussion. It would be people getting their questions and answers from you, and then having it simply as a vote to move forward to a support or not. So I'm asking you if one is preferable, surety today, whether that be an up or down, or uncertainty, but perhaps having committee members better prepared to vote on 16th.
Thank you. I understand the complexity of what you're dealing with. Is it possible to get a straw vote, just an informal up and down with thumbs?
Let me consider that. But Mr. Pruitt, I see Mr. Pruitt has his hand raised as well.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of ask something similar. Let me just preface this by saying that I have a student at the high school, another who recently graduated as a WPI. At this point, I just have nothing but admiration and gratitude for all of the time and effort that you all put into making our school system as effective as it is. And this is clearly a difficult choice. There's pros and cons. We think the pros outweigh the cons, of course, but we're not school committee members ourselves. And I just want to say, however you decide on this, we'll certainly respect your decision, and we'll of course be disappointed if the vote is no. But I just wanted to say, in terms of the work that we have to do, especially as volunteers, moving forward on this fairly complex and time-consuming grant application, I certainly, perfect timing. I certainly, this is, your vote to make, but I'm capable of reading a room, I think, and I've heard quite, a number of concerns voiced, and so to some extent, I guess it would be helpful to have a sense of, even if the technical questions were answered, including the questions that Chris Nixon brought up, and they came back positive, I'm not sure that we'd get a positive vote even with that, and so it would be helpful to know, I think, to the extent possible, whether minds are made up on this, or whether there really still is a potential for further information to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pruitt. I'd really like to finish it up in a few moments, Ms. Marchant, and then thank you.
Through you, Mr. Vignoria, can you ask Mr. Nixon, as the resident architect, buildings person, and Mr. Pruitt, Mr. Chen, and Ms. Trimarchi, given the condition of Skillings Field, does that at all sway you one way or the other? The flooding issues, some of the other issues that we have at Skillings Field, the turf. I'm just not sure about even the technical piece of it.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Mr. Nixon or Mr. Pruitt, if you have any thoughts about this location with flooding or turf that would be relevant, I would welcome that.
I guess I'll just briefly jump in and say, all the sites that we've looked at are fairly challenging. They're all basically in the downtown area. And speaking with Brian Zacchelli, he's essentially said, from a flooding perspective, there's really anywhere we look at is going to be within the 100-year floodplain. at least as currently mapped, that might, that the flood mitigation projects we've been doing might have, in effect, removed these areas from the flood zone, but we don't know yet. There's, essentially this particular spot at Skilling's Field seems viable so far. We may, as we get further down the road, if we do file an application and continue looking at the site, discover a fatal flaw with the site, and that would put an end to the project. But in terms of all, there are challenges everywhere, and thus far, this seems doable.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Nixon, if you have anything to add, and then
I appreciate that. So I don't have any specific concerns with respect to flooding on the site, but I would maybe just zoom way out and make an observation that all of we, school committee, climate action, select board, we at times react to opportunities that may come about through grants. We see them as sort of, and opportunistically, it's something to seize. If this should not bear fruit, this discussion today in this particular site, I would just be half full about this and say, we can be and should be really planful when it comes to our facilities and our sites with respect to the initiatives that Governor Baker has introduced. And that means what I'm really excited about is a conversation at Lynch about incorporating things like EV charging into a parking lot design. I regret, if I can just digress for a moment, looking at the background behind the chairman today, I can't get this out of my head. We had a very divisive and difficult discussion about solar panels on the roof of Winchester High School. I want to be clear, it's not because we didn't talk about it in design, it's because we didn't get any design criteria. When the time came up for discussion, a lot of decisions had already been made. I was a proponent of saying we should look at canopies. I still think we should be looking at that. UMass has done incredible work. If you've not been out west to UMass Amherst, canopies for covered parking, catching the sun's energy. We don't have to put anything on a roof membrane. They don't last forever anyway. You have to replace roofs. Some of the best installations in the Commonwealth that speak to climate change, adapting to climate change, come about through really collaborative, planful work. So if this doesn't bear fruit today, I don't want anybody to be discouraged, because there are, in my opinion, bigger and better things that we can do together, and I expect that we will.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I would welcome a motion, if someone is prepared to do so, to suspend our rules to allow us to vote on this as an action item, if someone is so willing to do so.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Can I clarify before a second? When you say vote, since we don't really have motion language.
Someone would have to make a motion. I just wanted to, I don't know what that motion would be. I wanted to make it eligible for someone to make a motion, which right now I don't believe is possible.
May I make a suggestion, if it's amenable to Ms. Marchant, that short of a vote, you look for consensus to support this team's grant application. And if that would be sufficient, perhaps Mr. Pruitt knows the details of what's required from government bodies. If you have consensus to support the grant application, then that gives them enough wiggle room to then move forward if they're successful and do some more analysis of the site. And then that might come back to us with a specific plan about specifically, here's what we want to do, here's where we want to put it, and it's been evaluated and it works.
I appreciate that. I would, my preference would be for us to give them an up or down vote so that they can focus on moving forward with another site, so that I don't really want to leave them in limbo. Unless they want to be left in limbo, which I didn't get that sense. I got the sense that they wanted some surety to move forward, was sort of the answer I was thinking. So I was mostly looking for a motion and a second, which I'm not sure if you seconded, Mr. Nixon, to suspend our rules, to allow us to then accept a motion to move this forward. Absent that, we just have no motion, and we cannot consider this. I will then ask generally if people are supportive of this, and if so, I will put it as a voting item at our next meeting. So we have a motion to suspend our rules. Do we have a second? Seeing none, our rules are not suspended. We cannot vote on this. I would ask if members are interested in seeing this as a voting item at our next meeting on the 16th. I would just looking the room to see if there's a nod if you'd like this, if you would like this as a voting item at our next meeting. I see an interest.
Voices, Brian, instead. I'm happy to have it at our next meeting.
As a voting, it would be a voting item. Okay, so I see that we have consensus that members are interested in voting at our next meeting. We could not suspend our rules to vote on it, so it's pretty clear that we do not have to support to vote or support it now, which is pretty clear. So if between now and our next meeting, this is something you want us to consider, we will have it as a voting item. But I can read the room too. It doesn't look very well supported with what I see right now. Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, I think whether something is scheduled for a vote is, I think, perhaps a little less helpful to us than a sense of support versus opposition to the idea. I guess to some extent, again, assuming that the technical details work, the slope of the parking lot was sufficient, and the contamination wasn't an issue, and so on and so forth. That of course doesn't address the other concerns raised about losing a parking space, and whether the school department would have to try to police these spaces to make sure they're just turnover or what have you. It would be, I think, through you to the committee, just helpful to us to know, who's kind of thumbs up, who's kind of and who's a thumbs down would be
so I appreciate
kind of helpful
that.
Just from the amount of time that we have to put into either doing this or not.
I appreciate that. It's a little bit of a hypothetical, though, of asking people if they're thumbs up without no understanding. My hope was that after this meeting, members would have an opportunity to reach out to you and get any of their questions clarified. And if that became clear shortly after that you had sort of satiated the questions that members had, then it would be helpful. I think, frankly, if I had been successful in calling a vote today, the vote would have been no. And it doesn't seem clear to me that this committee would have moved forward with that. But we didn't have that opportunity. So I appreciate that. I just think it's really hard to ask the committee to a hypothetical of, do they support this if everything else is okay? Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm sorry, that was poorly worded on my part. It's more a question of, whether there's support for us to continue forward with an application to the state, which doesn't obligate us to do anything, because first of all, they might not fund this. And second of all, even if they did offer us funding, we could still turn it down. I guess what I'm getting at is, assuming a conversation could continue and questions could be answered, is there, any scenario that conceivably ends with a majority vote in favor of doing this or not? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. We need to move on, and I want to be respectful. Ms. Marchant.
Just briefly, I respect our need to move on, but I think this is a critical point Mr. Pruitt is making. And as I understand it now, there is still a lot of work after the application stage to even make sure that this is a feasible site in terms of the technical and the community support. And I'm not one to stand in the way of climate progress. And as Mr. Vernalia so eloquently stated earlier, this is a forward-thinking opportunity for the schools. So if there are measures in place that will in the future inform us better on whether or not the site is actually a good site, then I'm not as hesitant to support the application itself, given those protections. So if that's the vote, if it's the vote of, can we move forward with an application and have the money to study it later to make sure Mr. Nixon's concerns and Dr. Evans and Mr. Mahoney's concerns are addressed, then why hold us back? So if that's the case, Mr. Vernalia, I'm prepared to make a motion and support the application.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon.
So a question to Mr. Pruitt and Mr. Markey, do you, given the requirements of this EVIP grant, as I understand it, it actually has to go on to like a national register of EV charging stations. We're expected to collect data on usage and so forth, which makes all kinds of sense to me. Given some of the feedback, though, you heard today about the operational expectations of the Skillings lot, do you know, are there certain baseline criteria that need to be met in terms of the usability of that charging station? So for instance, hearing that, you know, a student may park there for the school day and then take the bus to athletics, and that space isn't available till 8:30 at night. Is some of what you heard today potentially even disqualifying either outright, or does it in some way maybe put us, collectively us, in a worse position to even be successful going for the grant?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, just a couple of things on that. One would be that the kind of station we'd put in does track usage data, so that would be satisfied. The EVIP grant requirements do say that it's fine to have usage restricted to teachers and students if it's in a school lot. So that isn't as much of a problem. I think it's, for me, more, and this is why I asked the question about what happens after 3 o'clock in that lot. You know, even if the committee were, you know, favorable towards these stations and we could get the grant funding for it, I think we do want to see usage of these stations. You know, we wouldn't want to block there's limited funding for this. If we get these stations, some other communities will not get. Another community will not get these stations. So we want significant usage. And we spoke about this amongst ourselves. And our assumption was that after 3 o'clock on school days, and then on weekends, and certainly throughout the summer and on vacations, that there would be significant public use of these stations. If a scenario where a student would park there at 7 o'clock in the morning and not leave till 9 o'clock at night, that does trouble me. Absolutely. I wouldn't want to see that. And I don't know what it would take to make that not happen. But yeah, that would be troubling. We do want to see, even if we can get the grant, we want significant usage of these stations.
And I appreciate
Mr.
that.
Nixon, we really do have to wrap this conversation up in the next few moments. We have a lengthy agenda after this. Mr. Nixon, then we have 2 more hands raised, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to provide you an answer that you want, which is whether the committee is supportive of this. I was hoping to get you an up or down vote. I don't think I can get you what you're asking for at this meeting today.
Just say before you take your last questions, Ben, and total appreciation of your time constraints, how appreciative we are of what the school committee has dedicated to this morning. It's been a great conversation. We have a lot to walk away with. I really feel heard, and you can proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trimarchi. Ms. Bolognese, Ms. Bergstrom, Ms. Bergstrom, and then I'm going to move on.
If we're not voting today, Mr. Vanalia, I'm happy to follow up with Mr. Pruitt and Ms. Trimarchi with my questions later.
Thank you. That would be great. And I would welcome Mr. Pruitt, Ms. Trimarchi, Mr. Chen to engage with committee members outside of the meeting. And if we will be prepared to put this back as a voting item at our next meeting. And based on those conversations, we will have it there. And if the decision is to move forward, we can vote. And if the decision is your feeling is that there's just nothing you can do to satisfy committee members to move forward, then it will just be a placeholder. Ms. Bolognese.
That's fine. I'll take my questions offline.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. I'm sorry that we could not adequately address everything, but hopefully over the coming days, I would encourage committee members to ask your questions and get them answered, so that if we can, we can have this as a voting item at our next meeting and not have it be simply putting it off so that you ask the question 2 weeks from now, the day before. I would encourage you to think about it this afternoon and send your questions as soon as possible. Thank you very much, all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to return you all to being attendees, or you can also leave. Don't seem to be able to do it. Ms. Bolognese, if you could do that, and I will move on to the next agenda item. The next agenda item is fiscal year 22 budget update with enrollment projections. And Dr. Evans, I would welcome you to kick that off. And thank you for your patience as we had what was a very valuable, but certainly a lengthy conversation. So I appreciate your patience, everyone.
Thank you. Every year in November, we begin our budget planning process for the following school year with an enrollment projection. In your packet today, I would ask you to take a look at the first 2 pages in this section of the book have to do with the November projections. Then there's a sheet that talks about new registrations as of March 1st. There's a district updated enrollment as of March 1st. And then finally, the sheet I'm going to speak most about is the March 2021 K-5 enrollment projections. We look at enrollment projections in November to try to anticipate how many sections we'll need. Each section translates to a classroom teacher. Generally, we budget for somewhere between 108 and 110 sections across our 5 elementary schools. That's 110 individual classrooms. There are some factors that come into play in determining how many sections we need at a school. Some of that has to do with specialized programs, and students are included in regular education classrooms from those programs. How many classes need to be co-taught between a special education teacher and a regular education teacher, because there are a significant number of students with disabilities who need to be serviced with that instructional model. How many students are English learners? How large are the individual classrooms in the schools? And projections are always a little bit of a crystal ball, but we generally base it on 1, 3, 5, and 10-year averages to see whether we're in the ballpark. We try to understand where the tipping points are at certain grade levels where we traditionally increase enrollment based on students moving from, say, private kindergartens into our first grades, or in recent years, more students entering at middle and high school than we lose to private schools because folks are moving to town just to attend high school. And so the projection process helps us budget for the right number of teachers, but also we need to plan for the use of space. And as I've said many times, unlike many other districts, because of our increasing enrollment and our very tight space, particularly at the elementary level, we've run into a lot of challenges with that. One of the most important things we needed to do this year was to determine how many class sections we would project to need at Lynch School. Lynch Elementary School houses are part of our pre-K program, our preschool program. There are 4 preschool classrooms at Lynch and 2 at Vincent Owen. We, a few years ago, early in my tenure as superintendent, moved some of the pre-K classrooms to Vincent Owen, some of that swing space that was created when Vincent Owen was built shortly thereafter, because we ran out of space at Lynch to house them there. We have been readying Parkhurst School for a movement of pre-K students from Lynch so that we would free up more of those pre-K classrooms to convert them to regular K-5 classrooms at Lynch. It's a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to project this in the middle of a pandemic. As with many other districts across the Commonwealth, we have lost some students this year to homeschooling, to private schools, and simply many K-1 students did not enroll, were anticipated to enroll, but parents decided to defer that a year. You might remember in November, we identified what we call bounce back enrollment that's likely to happen in the fall of 2021. And so I'd just like to report about where we are in relation to that right now. We planned for 113 sections, which is significantly more than I would normally budget for, but because we knew that there were many K-1 students in particular who were not attending our schools this year, we wanted to be sure we had adequately budgeted for staffing and space for those students if they were needed. The FY22 preliminary budget that was voted by the school committee is always subject to change as we look at other factors, including town's ability to pay foundation aid coming in the form of Chapter 70, grants, and any shifts in enrollment or personnel. And so I'm not recommending that the school committee make any changes to the FY22 budget at this time. I'm just giving you a heads up where we might potentially be able to see a slight savings up to teachers if this plays out the way I expect. So the information that I have right now says we have identified 278 kindergarten students who are likely to register. That includes students who have completed the registration process or are in the middle of the registration process. Typically, we've run about 300 students in kindergarten or thereabouts. In recent years, it's been as high as 345, 327. It fluctuates considerably. A lot of it depends on how many students are already living in Winchester, how many students are on our census, but also students who move in. Available housing stock. Right now, there's very little available housing stock for move-ins. So there's a lot of sort of pent-up demand. So right now, as of March 1st, we have about 278 K students we've identified who are in the registration process. I project that in the end, we'll be somewhere around between 300 and 310 by the time all is said and done. First grade, I think, is where most of the students who didn't come to us for kindergarten will land. I had originally projected, based on the number of kindergarten students we have this year, that we would have about 300 first graders next fall. I'm raising that to about 355. We have identified about 100 first graders who will be new to the district next year who were not here for kindergarten. So I think we will still have a need for additional classrooms. I still think we'll need 111 is what I'm projecting right now. The other thing that's important to note is that we've already seen some of this bounce back enrollment. We continue to have students register for grades K to 5, K to 12, all throughout the year. And so I've realigned some of the grades 2 to 5 projections. And the most important thing, I think, that the impact of this kind of validation of my original projections today is that we will need 28 sections at Lynch School if all plays out as I expect, which is 2 more than we can currently accommodate without moving Parkhurst. So I just wanted to affirm that it is our plan to move the 4 preschools to Parkhurst. We'll continue to review enrollment carefully. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. The decision at an individual school about whether there are going to be 3 sections or 4 sections at a grade level, sometimes 5 sections, although that's rarer, really depends on both the makeup of the students at that grade level, their needs for specialized learning, their need for English learner instruction, and the kind of the components of the class. The projection sections that I've given you on page 20 include an average class size at first and kindergarten of about between 17 and 18, at second grade close to 20, at third grade a little higher, although one of the other lower grades could shift up to third as necessary, as we often do each year, and then 18 or 20 at grades 4 and 5. There aren't too many hot spots. We're still looking at Lincoln. Lincoln, as you know, is out of classrooms. We can move the music room to the stage. We prefer not to, but we'll watch Lincoln closely as well. So Lynch and Lincoln are the 2 kind of pinch points. Morocco typically has the most volatile moves in and move-ins and moves outs. And so we watch it every month from here until school starts. But right now, my best guess is we'll need 111 sections, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Are there questions regarding any of this from members of the committee? Ms. Bergstrom.
I just have a quick question for Dr. Evans. So right now you're not recommending removing any of the sections that you had planned for, is that correct?
Yeah.
Because looking at these class sizes for the fall and just sort of in the back of my head, anticipating that we may still require 3-foot distancing in our classrooms in the fall, I'm concerned about not starting the year with enough sections in case we may need more sections than we've already planned for to be able to put our kids in school full time in September. Many of these classrooms are already over 18. And I know that meets our class size guidelines, but until we're more certain about what the fall looks like, I'd be uncomfortable removing any sections at this time because of that.
Understood.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you. So question to Dr. Evans. So is the summary sheet, and I know you gave us a lot of information to look at in the packet, but the October 1 report that goes back to the 2001-2002 school year gives us the totals by high school, middle school, elementary. Are those bought? So that sheet, which has projections for next year, does that tie into your remarks? I'm clumsily asking this question. Is that sort of a historical document, or is that meant to reflect like the aggregate of what you're thinking about for next year?
No, I haven't made any changes to that since November. The only sheet I've made changes to is the sheet that has the K-5 sections and projected sections. So the historical October 1st each year, it says it's on page 16. I just pulled that out of the November projection. I have not updated that.
But to be clear, Dr. Evans, there was another line on there, which was your return, COVID-19 return, which was your guesstimate of how many would return, and that's not on this sheet here.
That doesn't show on, that didn't print out for some reason on that sheet. It's in your budget book. So do you have a question about middle and high school enrollment, or is this a K-5 question?
Well, no, I want to just understand if I was misunderstanding the document, because I know as you were going through, I appreciate the detail at the elementary level. I think I heard you say you were going to bump up where you think right now, grade 1, you're thinking, I thought I heard you say 355, and it looks like that tracks with your detail sheets. That summary sheet does show overall enrollment for next school year, 21-22, and that shows grade 1 at 255. So I didn't know if that was, that could either be a typo, or this could just be an earlier snapshot, and that's where I wasn't sure, but I did the math, and I mean, those numbers do add up to the 1931 for the K-5 level. So if this is just an earlier snapshot, the way I react to that is I say, so we're currently thinking 100 more kids than we did some time ago, right?
So it's historical, right? So if you look at the original sheet where I added additional lines, we went through this in November. We had a lot of difficulty because we typically use a 3-year average. Should we use a 1-year average? It's artificially depressed because we've lost some students this year, right, temporarily, the bounce back students. So so what I didn't know was whether the students who had not come as kindergarten students would join us as first graders or kindergarten students. It appears most of them are going to join us as first grade students. So yes, we will be bumping up we'll be adding an additional 100 first graders above what we are now carrying from the kindergarten class.
And so I appreciate that. So where I'm leading with this, it's sort of it's a request for information. It's also like a public service announcement, because in a hotly contested school committee race this year, I gather people are talking a lot about enrollment. So, if you were to look through a school committee packet and you find, this, well, you can't see it on my iPad, but you see the grid that you included in the packet, and it shows enrollment figures for next year, but there are other documents that kind of reflect a more contemporary understanding, right? I think it would be helpful if not too much work, to kind of use that tool, Dr. Evans, and maybe update that just so it's a quick way for the committee to see in aggregate what our thinking is for next school year with all the presumptions you just articulated. And that way, if we have multiple versions of documents floating around, we have one set that all kind of tie into the same figures.
Sure, I'd be happy to. That's the same. We're up against the same thing the state it was up against in trying to determine foundation budgets for us. Across the state, about 5% of the students are no longer enrolled in public schools, and part of that is all the factors that related to the pandemic. We have every indication that most of them plus will come back, and so based on our bump in enrollment this year, kids have already come back. And especially if we're able to go 5 full days in April, May, June for at least K-5, we'll probably see more try to register at that point too. So if there are people at home listening who aren't sure what's going to happen in the fall and are still holding back about decisions about whether we'll be back in person 5 full days and under what conditions, we're planning for and hoping for a full regular return with everybody back in the classroom without the kind of distancing that we've had to have in place this year. If people are thinking about registering, if they'd at least give us some indication about that, it'll really help us in terms of solidifying some of these sections and numbers. To Ms. Bergstrom's point, if we're required to come back even at 3 feet distance, 2 additional sections aren't enough, nor do we have space to add more sections than that, depending on the school. And so it's going to be problematic for us if we'll have to really scramble and subdivide some of our large spaces at many schools if that's the case. I'm really hoping it's not the case. 3 feet is actually pretty close. 3 feet as defined by the state is 3 feet from the center of your seat, if you're a student sitting in a desk, to where the closest next student is. And that's less than an arm's length away. And so all of these things are weighing on us heavily. We just want to be sure we budget for the right number. And it's actually a savings to the district if we run fewer K sections than 1, because then we don't have a full-time assistant in those grade 1 classes either, if we run more first grades. So that's where we are. I will do the K-12 projection and see how accurate I am I won't be here to see the September enrollment, but see how accurate I am in terms of anticipating the bounce back.
You can be a spectator sport and be watching at home with
an orange juice. Yeah.
Ms. Marchand.
Thank you. Dr. Evans, I may have missed this, but would we consider moving the entire pre-K, not just the Lynch classrooms, also the VO classrooms to Parkhurst? And I think I'm just trying to think of if you have to be more creative with space, that frees up even more. So I don't know if I missed that part.
Sure. So I think we're anticipating that VO will have sufficient space and can continue to house the 2 pre-K classrooms there. They've done extraordinarily well. It's good space for them. It's located adjacent to a play area that's very good for them. And there's obviously there are significant advantages to having all of the preschool in one place in terms of staffing and support and collaboration for those folks. But right now, for the first year, we're only going to bring the 4 classrooms. Rather than disrupting families in 2 schools, we're just going to disrupt the Lynch families at this point. The school committee may decide at some point to move the VO students here as well. Some of that will depend on how many spaces. We're going to be sharing space with central office at Parkhurst, how much space we needed. Parkhurst for the preschool and for central office. And so a lot of moving parts here. But right now, I think we've only been planning to move the Lynch pre-K classrooms here.
But if we're paying for a nurse and we have the space and we could shift students from other elementary schools, could that be an option that's still on the table? So to alleviate some of the burdens on Lincoln and Morocco or wherever there are constraints, if we're going at 3 feet, is that something that's still on the table for us?
I suppose it's always on the table. At some point, I project in the next couple of years, the interim superintendent will have to make some hard choices about diverting some students from other schools where we're simply out of space, like Lincoln is most likely, to another school for a year or two until Lynch is built. And there will be some hard choices in the future. What I'd say is that it's easier and for us to plan only for the Lynch students at this time, and less disruptive to those families who love being at VO and the 2 teachers who love being at VO. And my recommendation would be, if we can, to leave them there for this year.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Are there additional questions about the enrollment numbers? Thank you, Dr. Evans. We look forward. You just said you were going to bring us back numbers. When did you say when, or is it just at a future date?
You know, I'll send you, I mean, I can send it for your information, and if you want to discuss it at the next meeting, we can. I can easily update the K-12 projections. I haven't looked closely at the 6 through 12 numbers, but they're not atypical. Most of those move-ins come in the summer. We don't have a lot of, right now, we don't have a lot of pre-enrollment for 6 through 12.
Thank you very much. Seeing no additional questions or comments, I would move on to, and are you complete with your presentation, Dr. Evans? Thank you. Yeah. I would move on to the next report and discussion item, which is the COVID-19 district update. We have some pages in our packet, and I would turn back over to you again, Dr. Evans.
Sure. So 3 things I want to talk about in terms of this update: the status of the pilot pool testing initiative, the K-5 working group plans, and the latest DESE guidance on bringing more students back for more in-person time. So I have heard from the nurse, the lead nurse, that we had a successful first day for cohort A of the pooled testing pilot initiative. Well, as is generally the case when you're starting to ramp up this kind of pool testing, participation rates are quite low. There were about 25 participants in 7 pools. We'll hope, fingers crossed, that all of them are negative. And then another group of students will have the opportunity later this week in the BV cohort. And then every week thereafter, we hope to add additional participants. So right now the participation rate is low, but there's some advantages to that in terms of ramping up your process. We are grateful for the parent volunteers. There was no way we could have done this without the parent volunteers because the swabs have to be observed. We just don't have the staff in district to support that. We also have a person from Beacon who's coming as a site facilitator, paid for by the state, and that needs to continue. So our plan is to report back in perhaps 4 weeks to the school committee about the status of the pool testing initiative, see what the marks of success are, and then have some projections for what continuation of the pool testing initiative might cost, see whether the town thinks that's feasible. So there are lots of hurdles left to to overcome before we're able to put this in. I would say that experience has taught us that the startup of all of these efforts is always a very heavy lift. It was this time too. We had much support from the public health department. We're very grateful for that support, but I'd also like to recognize the high school principal and lead nurse. They've put in a lot of time getting ready for this and ramping it up. And we'll let you know how it's going as we go, and then we'll determine at some point whether it's something we'd like to continue. It will go through the middle of April. The state will fund it for the full 6 weeks, and so as we're starting beginning of March, it'll go to the middle of April with state funding and support. After that, if we want to continue it, it's completely on us. There are no funds in the school department budget to support this, so it would have to be a town allocation. Any questions on the pool testing initiative?
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
No. All right, second thing I'd like to talk about is our K-5.
My apologies, I see a late raised hand by Ms. Bolognese.
Sorry, didn't mean to be late. Just a couple of quick questions. So with the results from today's testing, we're expecting those back tomorrow?
We are.
Okay. And then you had mentioned that next week there will be a different pod. So does the pod from this week also get retested next week, or is it a completely new pod?
So each cohort will have an opportunity to be tested each week. So all students and all faculty members by the third or fourth week would have the opportunity to be tested. So we started with seniors. It was our group with the highest positivity rate in the district by far. And so we wanted to start with that group alone this week. And then we'll start to add teachers and 11th graders. If the numbers stay small, we'll probably allow 10th and 9th graders to jump in more quickly than that. There were very large numbers at the high school, 1,400 students. You can see in a couple of, close to 200, I think, adults who would be eligible, count all the coaches and everyone else. That's a lot of people to test. And we're doing it before school, in the gym. We want to make it not disruptive to learning. We didn't know whether we'd have a lot of people lining up to test or just a few. And so we started off kind of slow. So everyone will have the opportunity. The principal will send something out again, reminder to parents and students. Everybody can register now to be part of the pool and then jump in when it's open to them. We don't have a lot of students pre-registered, but we would encourage them to do so, and also faculty members. But it is completely voluntary. Any other questions on pool testing?
Yes. Dr. Evans, do we know when we will have an estimate of what it would cost us from April till the end of the year?
We would have to negotiate our own contract with the provider if we wanted to stay with Beacon. They would let us know how much they would charge us per pool, and then how much they charge us for the follow-up PCR testing if we needed to, how much they would charge us for a site facilitator, et cetera. I mean, some of this costs are sunk costs, for some of the technology and that kind of the infrastructure. And so it's not inexpensive. Depends on participation rates and how much we can negotiate. Unfortunately, the state negotiated rates for the duration of the 6-week pilot, but then every individual district is on its own to negotiate its own rate thereafter.
So do we know when that will be though? So this ends mid-April. Do we know by like April 1st, will we have a sense of what it will cost us to continue it after mid-April, or?
It depends on how the negotiations go with the companies that we have to negotiate with. And I'll have to talk with Ellen Whittemore, because this will be a procurement issue, because it's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can say that clearly.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Any additional questions about this? Seeing none, Dr. Evans.
Okay, so the K-5 working group plan. So what I have in your packet are the names of the 18 members of the K-5 working group. We have 4 meetings scheduled in the next 2 weeks to try to formulate a plan or plans for school committee consideration for returning students more fully in person. Included in the K-5 working group are the 5 elementary principals, plus Chrissy Capadonna, who's the full administrator, central office members, 2 parents, 2 school committee members, and several teachers. And so we will work hard to respond to the information that was sent out by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from Commissioner Riley on February 23rd. You might remember at our last meeting, we were kind of all taken by surprise by the announcement from Commissioner Riley and the governor that they were going to only count in-person hours towards student learning time. That's a proposal before the Board of Ed, State Board of Ed, and that districts were expected to have students in school 5 full days, at least K-5, and then look at possibilities for middle and high school students thereafter. I just want to make it clear that the commissioner said that some districts may ask for a waiver for the student learning time. It's unclear to me whether any districts will be granted a waiver, and it was not our intention to put in for a waiver unless it's required, unless the working group and the school committee cannot come up with a way to transition our students to be fully in person for 5 days. It is not a small task to do this. If we had been able to bring our students back safely and meet the guidelines that we believe were essential to continuing school in a manner that allowed for students to learn safely and for us to meet the guidelines put out by particularly the CDC, we would have done so since September. So I'm not going to be overly optimistic that this is not going to come without some hard choices. And there are lots of complexities here because we've also been instructed by the commissioner that full remote students will be entitled to stay full remote through the end of this school year. Whether or not he is going to approve any full remote students next year is unclear. He has also made it clear to superintendents that districts who don't comply with revised student learning time recommendations, if they're approved by the Board of Ed, will face Saturday or summer sessions to make up for the additional hours. As you might imagine, there are some districts who are more able to do this than others more easily, districts with more space, districts with more staff. And so that's an endless source of frustration that people are comparing district to district. For example, Needham Public Schools has their educational foundation, giving them several $100,000 to hire 9 additional teachers so they can split classes and have students back for more days. Even if we had the funding for staff members and were able to hire them, we don't have the space to do that. And so it is very frustrating for us to try to explain to parents why we're not back more fully in person. There was always going to be some flexibility on Wednesdays, but there are always hard choices to be made in relation to that, particularly in terms of cleaning and disinfection between the 2 cohorts. Many of the things that we think have helped us stay open and have helped limit school spread, not eliminate it, but limit it, will have to be put aside if we're going to bring more students back. And so it's not an easy task that this working group has in front of it. There are lots of complex issues related to special education service grids, facilities, staffing, medical exemptions for some teachers who can only teach remotely, impact on specialist schedules, impact on reading services, impact on English learner services, lunches, finding a way to safely eat at lunch with, we have to stay 6 feet apart at lunch, etc. So lots of hurdles to overcome, but a very willing group. We'll take another look at what will happen and then survey parents to see what and staff members to see what their feelings are about the options that will be put before the school committee. So happy to answer any questions, but I just want to be sure that everyone who might be listening at home and all the school committee members know that we would like nothing better than to have all of our students back 5 days full and in person. If it could have been done, we would have already done it. And so doing it is going to require some really hard choices. And we'll continue to work closely in concert with public health to look at rates of positivity in our community and in our schools, and look at mitigation efforts that might be necessary to continue. So there are 2 school committee members who will be serving on this working group, and our first meeting is later today. So if there's anything that you have as a question or a concern, please raise it, and then I'll be sure that the working group considers that.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Marchant.
Thank you. Dr. Evans, just to make it very clear, the only reason waiver came up last time was because it was a point of fact. It was what Commissioner Riley had brought up. Nobody discussed it in terms of that's definitely the path we're taking, correct? Okay.
Correct. I have no intention
of throw that out there. That is a rumor that I don't want spreading because it's not true. Second of all, we are all 100% committed to getting our kids back in 5 days a week within the guidelines, not only for the health and safety of our teachers, which is crucial. You can't have public education without teachers' health. So yes, that's clearly important to us, but there's also the importance of the health and safety of our families and our children. As the virus changes, we're still learning about the risks to children, which is being studied, and more is being learned every day about the impact. There is an impact on children's health. And I understand the mental health aspect, but without our physical health, we can't even get to the mental health question. Next, it would cost us less in mental health expenditures, facilities, staffing, all of that if we had regular school. None of us are enjoying this pandemic, nor are our children. So, and it's costing us a lot more money to have these things in place. So it's not that we're holding back secret funds. It's not that we are being difficult or we have our priorities misplaced. It is that we are faced with a pandemic that is impacting us all in very different ways, and our kids in different ways. My next point, kind of a question, is our teachers, as Evan stated, are trying to meet the students where they're at, whether it's from elementary to high school. The teachers are frustrated too, but a lot of them are communicating with their supervisors on what can be done better. And so the system is constantly updating and learning itself. Finally, as I read Commissioner Riley's statements since his surprise announcement, even he is coming back off of some of the aggressive tone that he initially had. Can you point out, because I read something yesterday or today about he kind of went back a little bit. Can you clarify for us how even the commissioner and the governor aren't really sure of what they're putting forth? Because they are even updating and changing and taking in the pressure and adjusting to it.
So I don't know what the commissioner or the governor are thinking often, but what I would say is there are some things that local area superintendents met recently, the 12 members of the Middlesex League, the superintendents, Lexington, Burlington, all the teams we play, meet regularly, and we discuss this, and none of us have been able to open fully in person, not a single district in the league. A lot of us share similar constraints. A lot of the districts in our league have far more resources financially than we do. But the commissioner, I think, in the Board of Ed are more focused on the 40% of the kids who haven't been in school since last March in the state. So there are many large districts who haven't transitioned students at all for any in-person learning. So they're really focused on those districts. And they were frustrated because a lot of those districts, for very good reasons, just had made no progress towards bringing students back fully in person. We have been fully back from the day that we could at the beginning of September, and have hardly missed a day. And so I feel really glad about that. Is it enough? No, I didn't train for this. I didn't want this. None of us wanted this. All of us are endlessly frustrated, but we're really pleased that it has kept the rate of transmission low. And I think that it's worked well. And so is the Board of Ed going to support the commissioner's recommendation? I don't know. What I would recommend is that the working group try to formulate a plan with options and let the school committee members get feedback on those options and then vote on an option. We may be forced, as the next month or two passes, even if we bring more students back, we may be forced into full remote if the spread suddenly spikes again, if we can't keep enough adults in the building who are not quarantined or isolated to keep our schools open. That was always our fear, that our adult support for students, that those folks would be quarantined or isolated because they were ill. And I have to point out that many people in the district have been quarantined due to exposure outside of school. So it's not even spread within the school that's causing those quarantines. And so there are a lot of complex factors here at play. And I would advocate for the school committee to make the best decisions possible, given the information that we have about what is a safe path forward to bring as many students back in person as we can, and some of those are going to require some hard choices and giving up some things that we have had in place since the start of the year, particularly the deep cleaning and disinfecting on Wednesdays, or the cohorting of students in smaller groups. Or we may have to reassign some students to other schools or other teachers to make this happen. We may have to bring back some staff members who are now out on full remote. So there are a lot of moving parts, but it's not as if we haven't been looking at this. The elementary principals have been working on this for months. And the only reason we didn't bring a proposal forward to you is they all come with some pretty serious choices, very hard choices that are disruptive choices. And we had very high hopes that educators would be prioritized for the vaccines, and the variable that's the one that has the greatest impact on whether we can keep our schools open day to day is if the adults are vaccinated. That takes one big worry off the table in terms of adults transmitting to students and also adults having to quarantine or isolate. I would point out the CDC and the Mass Public Health still are at odds over this. And so vaccination at this point does not mean that someone who is exposed does not have to quarantine in Massachusetts. The CDC says you don't have to quarantine. So even that disconnect makes our choices more difficult. So, but if there are any other questions or concerns that would be helpful for the committee to discuss, the two representatives in the school committee are Michelle Bergstrom and Karen Blanes.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bergstrom and then Mr. Nixon.
Thanks, Brian. Dr. Evans, I also just wanted to clarify a few things because I also feel like there may be some misunderstanding around some of the issues that we're actually discussing here today and that will be discussed going into the K-5 team. I did hear Commissioner Riley say that he wanted students back in 5 days a week, but I think the crux that we're still not understanding from DESE yet is that this year we received a waiver for our student learning time requirements, which is how long students need to be in front of a teacher each day. And that what Commissioner Riley said he was actually considering changing was that waiver. And until we know what that looks like, that's why I heard you say, you know, he said we may have to go to school Saturdays and in the summer. So the parameters around what we're building are still unclear from DESE because the difference between 5 days a week and a 6-hour school day are still, there's still a gray area in between those. Is that correct?
So the student learning time parameters, what he's looking for the Board of Ed to do is to withdraw those and hold us to our normal number of hours that we have per year after you take away the 10 days at the beginning of the year. And so you're correct technically that you could go 3 24-hour days at school and cover the same amount of time and have 2 days off if the DESE says that was okay. The problem is that we have 4 union contracts that dictate the length of the school day and the length of the work day. And so those are pretty inflexible. People naturally have commitments or daycare issues or other things. So we don't have a lot of flexibility. We have the regular lengths of the school day, and the commissioner was pretty clear that what he meant was 5 full days of school, not 5 in-person days that are only mornings, not double sessions. It's not an insubstantial hurdle to overcome lunch. We have utilized in each of our schools as many spaces as possible for lunch. So doubling the number of students at lunch is going to be problematic, and it's going to be a real difficult hurdle for us to overcome without a lot of additional support, particularly for supervision. the working group will take a look at that. We maybe have to call on community volunteers to assist us with some of that. It all gets easier as we move into the warmer months, though, and we can have some students outside for some part of the time. So the working group is going to look at what options we have for bringing students back in person for as much time as is safe and feasible, with the goal of having them all back in full. And so, again, that may not be possible without some very hard choices. So I'll leave it at that.
So, and I heard you say lunch, and we keep saying there are obstacles and hard choices. Do you feel comfortable articulating for the community, besides lunch, what are some of the other hard choices you anticipate parents having to make with a return, as Desi has described?
So some of our classes, some of the obstacles will be how many of our full remote families will want to come back in person, how many of our current hybrid families won't be comfortable coming back 5 days in mixed cohorts, and trying to staff that. We were tasked with keeping the same budget and the same staffing levels and running two separate, essentially a 6th elementary school, which is our full remote school, significant number of students, 400 students in that model. So the hurdles include personnel hurdles, staffing hurdles, they include space use hurdles. So there are some in-person hybrid classrooms with 22 students or 23 students and a couple of adults assigned to that room because there might be a student or two who requires the assistance of an ESP, and you simply, even at 3 feet, can't fit those students. So there might be some space constraints. Should the school committee decide that the 3-foot guideline is safe and advisable, there still will be some classrooms that will have to be separated, some students removed from some classrooms and placed somewhere else. There may be some hard choices. If the school committee decides based on the data that 4 feet is the minimum or 5 feet is the minimum spacing that we're comfortable with, then we could be faced with some choices of moving some students to other classrooms or other schools where there is available space. In order to make this work, it's going to require some significant hard choices, and it's going to disrupt the normal school day. Just for lunches, we anticipate we'll have to extend to have 4, 5, 6 lunches a day. And that's a lot of moving parts and additional costs and much more supervision. So there's just a lot of hard choices that we'll have to make. So the working group will look at how many students, with some assumptions, how many students are currently in the hybrid model, how many have been assigned to each classroom, how many would have to be reassigned in order to have a safe number if we were going to have them there 5 full days. So that's just one of the things that we'll look at.
So I guess I also just want to be clear and speak to the community as well that while there has been a lot of creative thinking around this, and while there will continue to be, if we're going to make this work, there's also going to have to be a lot of community partnership and understanding that the hard choices are not necessarily hard choices that just the school committee and the school department are going to have to make, but the parents are going to have to make and understand. If we now need to tell your first grader that they're going to have a new teacher for the rest of the school year, or a new school building, or that we need 20 parents to be able to run lunch safely in each elementary school each day to provide the supervision that we need to provide for the number of lunches that we need to provide to keep students and teachers safe. So I want to be clear that this is going to have to be creative thinking on behalf of the parents and the community, and flexibility on their part as well, if the school department and the teachers and the school committee are going to be creative and flexible. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Mr. Nixon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Evans, has an invitation been extended to Jennifer Murphy to participate in this working group on behalf of the health department?
Yes, but Jen Markham, our nurse leader, is going to represent the both public health and school nursing on this committee.
You broke up there a little bit on me. So can you just say that again? I wasn't sure I heard you.
Sorry, Jen Markham, our nurse leader, will be representing public health and nurses on this committee.
So my hope was at the last meeting when we talked about this, that we would extend the invitation to Jen Markham and Jen Murphy. I feel like Ms. Murphy has brought forward some really helpful perspectives. She's not a district employee, so all we could do is ask her to participate. I think they're both essential. That's why I mentioned them both. I think a committee with 3 Jennifers instead of 2 would be all the better. That's for you, Dr. Ellen Emma, as well. So I see you're already on the list. I would strongly encourage you to just be sure that Jen Murphy knows that she's welcome to participate. I think she's been a really helpful voice. She's been helpful for me, and I think for other members of the school committee in coming to some decision-making moments. And I think you touched on it just a moment ago, Dr. Evans, when you said, the school committee may have to decide if 4 feet is acceptable or 5 feet is acceptable. If I have to make that decision, I want to make that decision with as much input as sort of is reasonably expected. And I see Ms. Murphy as a real asset to our community, and I'd like her opinion on that. However we could make that available. So I just want to underscore, for me personally, it's important for her to be participating to the extent that she can. I want to share, I suppose I just want to touch once again on the waiver issue, because that came up as well during public comment. I certainly had a lot of questions about the waiver because I wanted to understand what the heck they were for. They weren't really explained in the press conference. And I do understand that many districts have been having these conversations in a real formative way. But I understood that they, much like we've talked about our own aspirations, are kind of in a crawl, walk, run mentality. And so I was trying to understand do the waivers permit that or not? I heard during public comment, dozens of districts that have in some way outlined plans for return to school. They are dozens, it's 40-ish, 45 districts. We have over 400 LEAs in Massachusetts. So the vast majority have not come forward with plans, and I know they're sort of struggling with how to develop them. And I also want to register my frustration that formal requests to DESE for information on the districts that have put forward plans so that we can understand who they are, we can reach out to them and get information on how they're doing it. That information has not been forthcoming. I continue to be frustrated by the disconnect between messaging from the commissioner and governor about expectations for return to school and a disconnect with public health. As recently as yesterday, Dr. Walensky's comments about concern towards rolling back protective measures, which includes social distancing, which is something that she does not recommend, that she had concern on behalf of the CDC towards that. It frustrates me because fundamental in this conversation is, are we going from 6 feet to 3? I would have felt better if we had representatives from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health standing at the podium with the governor and Commissioner Riley last week. So I'm still hungry for some movement between those two entities, if you will, sort of the educational aspirations that come from the governor and the commissioner, some movement towards better coordinated public health guidance, whether that's from the CDC or from the state. I feel like the conversations that we have around this table, to the extent they're being interpreted by some in this community who spoke at public comment as reasons why we can't or reasons why we won't, I would encourage them to kind of reframe that. From my point of view, being a process guy, I always want to understand what our challenges are. If we can't articulate what the challenges are, we can't come up with a plan. I want a plan to clear every hurdle, every speed bump along the way. I was especially disappointed, though it's not the chair's fault, it's our fault. We scheduled a meeting last week on the 23rd. That happened to coincide with Weston. I really wanted to watch Weston's school committee meeting because I'm intimately familiar with the facilities they have, the pressures they're under, their aspirations to get kids back in school. And I knew that it would be featured in their school committee meeting. But what I can tell this committee and those listening today is Dr. Connolly, their superintendent, articulated a plan to get their high school to get high school students to stay in school until 1 o'clock, no lunch, and then to go home, and to have those cohorts in school on alternating Wednesdays. And that's the first priority by March 1st. By March 15th, all hybrid students, including their younger learners, all hybrid students K-12, to get them in 5 days a week until lunch, 1 o'clock, but no lunch at school. They go home. And then the third step of that plan, again, crawl, walk, run, is to get the K-5 students in school until 2:20 and to shoot to do that by April 5th. But again, that's not for kids in grades 6 through 12. But that's the plan. I hope I can go back and watch that meeting and understand what they're going to do creatively to solve some of the same space constraints that we have. And some of the solutions that are being suggested in public comment today, I hope can be solutions for us. I'm not confident that they are, but I'm hopeful that they could be. It's going to take partnership with our building commissioner, our fire chief, for crying out loud, all of our principals, and just, again, very creative use of space and some difficult choices to be made. Ms. Bergstrom's quite right. Difficult choices to be made on the part of parents in terms of where their child might be placed, just as a consequence of whatever plan that we come up with. Last remark I would just make is I appreciate the last person who spoke at public comment today, who I think really hit it on the head. I think this clearly is still a divided parent community, much as it was in August. I said back in the summer that my sense from the emails and phone calls I was receiving is it seemed to me we had about a third of parents who felt we needed to be in school 5 days a week, bell to bell with precautions. We had about a quarter of parents who felt we should be fully remote and no student should ever set foot in a school building. But in fact, the majority in the middle felt that we needed to be in some sort of hybrid. And as luck would have it, half of those thought our plan was too conservative and the other thought it was too liberal, except for maybe 10 families who thought we got it right. I think that still is kind of a reflection of where we are in the community. I hear loud and clear the frustrations and some of the painful personal anecdotes that parents are sharing, particularly those of our younger learners. I have an elementary student myself. I really do hear it and I appreciate it. However, we have a large parent community with many diverse opinions and perspectives. And while we all hear it, at the end of the day, I concur with whoever said it a moment. I think Zena said it when she was leading off. Our goal is still the same. We want to get our kids back in school in as fulsome a way as possible and as quickly as we can. When we talk about the hurdles that we face, it's not because we're looking for excuses not to. We're trying to understand what problems we need to solve. And I appreciate you've set up the group. I'll close with my opening statement. I hope we can find a way to just keep our health department folks meaningfully engaged in this. I'm glad Ms. Markham's on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bolognese?
Still muted.
Muted, Ms. Bolognese.
Apologies. But thank you very much. I had a question for Dr. Evans, piggybacking off of Ms. Bergstrom's question. I guess you had mentioned some of the challenges that we are facing. And I guess I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on scheduling around IEPs and then also with our special service specials.
Sure.
And
Sure. So trying to service, as you might imagine, with the same staffing levels, trying to service both in-person and full remote learners, it has been very challenging. We have many students in the district. Pam, what are we at? 900 students with IEPs, something like that. 850. 837 students on IEPs. And Jen, how many students get EL services? About
130, 140.
130 who get direct services, and then a number of students who are on monitor status.
Correct.
So 1,000 of our 4,600 students have complex schedules, at least. We have more students also on 504 plans who also need to be accommodated. So what I would say is that any change to the schedule has a domino effect, and the same folks who are servicing some students remotely and some in person, if we change those schedules, it is a very complex process. Students with disabilities are legally entitled to the services that are on their IEPs, and it was a superhuman effort to get everybody their services this year, given the staffing levels that we have. And so anything that we do to change the schedule, we do have a couple of hundred students at the elementary level who are there 4 full days. Is that right, Pam? Something like that? Yeah. So many students with significant disabilities are already in school essentially the full time for the 4 full days. But there are many other students, some with very significant disabilities, with many different providers who have chosen full remote. Their families have chosen full remote. That has been a very complex and challenging effort to schedule those students. So on the special education front and the English learner front, moving students around from teacher to teacher and changing their schedule is extremely problematic and challenging. Not to say we can't overcome that, but it is going to be a big challenge, and it's not something you can turn the Queen Mary around very quickly on. Right now, all of our elementary students are receiving art, music, PE, and library remotely on the days that they're home. And so all of those teachers are coming in, they're in the building, but they're teaching remotely. Some of that has to do with their spaces are being used for other things. Like all of the gyms are being used for lunchrooms because we have to expand the space available for students to eat lunch, even with only fewer than half the students there. And so changing the special subjects is not as easy because those teachers are also teaching the full remote students and the in-person students, although all remote. It may mean me reshuffling all of those classes. And so it's a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it's an additional level of complexity. Special education services, EL services, and how students are getting art, music, PE, and library, all complex. And that's one of the tasks that we have in our planning document for the working group to address today.
Thank you very much for helping to talk, or for talking through some of those. And I would just say, again, I had said it last week, and I believe Ms. Bergstrom and Mr. Nixon have also, and Ms. Marchand have also alluded to this, that I agree that whatever options that come forward are going to require some give and take from everybody, from our families, our caregivers, our staff, from all of us, and that no one is going to be entirely satisfied with what comes forward, and we are really going to have to work together as a community to get to our end goal. So I'm committed to this, and to this, and I believe we are all committed to this, to bringing our schools back, our students back to school. And as Mr. Nixon was saying, what problems that we need to solve going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Bolognese. Ms. Bergstrom.
I just wanted to also, as the school committee representative with Ms. Bolognese to the K-5 working group, I just wanted to articulate for a moment something else that I heard in public comment, which is that this is about why we can't, and that's absolutely not the goal of this working group or the way it's set out. We would be unrealistic if we didn't look at the advantages, the disadvantages, and the cost of any plan that we develop, and if we didn't articulate that well to the entire community that we serve. And that would be all of our stakeholder groups, our parents, as well as our teachers. So I think it's really important just for everybody to hear loud and clear that this isn't a committee that's designed to tell us why we can't do something, but a committee to tell us what we can do and what the advantages and disadvantages that will be and how much it will cost us, because those are all realities of running a school district. So I just wanted to make sure that this committee heard me say that, and the community as well. And that there was one more public comment that I was wondering if Dr. Alanima could address for us, and that it was the assertion that we are not preparing our students for the next grade level, and that students and that teachers are not able to teach the amount of curriculum that they need to be able to teach to have our students ready for the next grade.
Question to Dr. Alanima, if you feel prepared to respond to it at this point.
Sure. So, as everybody knows, we did a lot of work starting last spring and through the summer.
It's difficult to hear you. If you could speak up a little bit, my apologies.
Let me turn my volume up. Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. So, as we talked about, and we've had presentations in the meetings, the teachers really were phenomenal starting last spring with working very collaboratively to identify what are the most critical skills. The parent did refer, yes, we color-coded all of our standards, green, yellow, and red, and we have published them. They're on our website, so that we are very mindful.
Sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear.
I think you need to speak a little louder, or there's something a little off with your mic. It seems to be picking up background noise more than you a little bit, or muting you when it's picking up background noise.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. I would just speak up loudly.
Okay. I'm in my office by myself yelling. So the teachers really worked hard to identify, as the parent mentioned, we prioritized our standards, what were the most critical, what were important, and then what may be things we may not get to this year, in order to be very consistent and collaborative, so that our students come in next year with consistency with the curriculum. And what we've been doing over the past month and a half is really assessing where are we, how is it going. Teachers have, and they've been turning in documents for that and working with our coordinators and directors around those things. What we're really seeing is that we have been able to really meet a lot of the skills already, and just starting March, of what we thought were the most essential, and certainly have also been working on important standards. No, we're not doing everything we do in every year, and I believe that to be true for every district probably in the nation, never mind Massachusetts. So when we meet with our counterparts in other districts, everyone finds that to be a very common theme. What we are really trying to do, and Evan did a nice job highlighting this, is go deeper with what we're doing. So our students really show what they've learned, rather than just take a test on something, which may or may not show how deeply they have the material. When he talked about being able to do a project or to be able to show in some way what they could do with it, we're actually able to measure that we're getting to those essential skills. So I think we've done a nice job with it. It's not the same as every year. No one anticipated it would be. And the good news is, worldwide, everyone's in that same position. So we'll come into next year with some real consistency, being able to go forward with our curriculum after lots of work again this summer, once we're finished with the year.
Thank you very much. I just have two quick points I want to make, because I feel like sometimes it's easy to forget that the 5 school committee members, I did the math, collectively have 11 children in Winchester Public Schools, representing 6 kids in 6 of our 7 public schools. We have parents with kids who have attended all 7 public schools. We have 2 more children who have graduated from our public schools. We are parents first. We run for school committee because we are parents and we care about the school system, we care about our kids. And if I sound choked up, it is because I am a little bit, because I think sometimes it sounds like we don't care. It's personal to us, just like it's personal to everyone who calls in. We don't tend to tell you the struggles that we have with our kids. And I know that each and everyone on the school committee has had struggles with their own kids with this year. So I I do take it personally, and I shouldn't. I need to let it just roll off me. But when people say that we're not listening, that we don't care, that we have some other agenda, our agenda is to keep our kids safe and get them the best possible education they can in a pandemic year. And I'm sure we failed on a number of occasions, but I'm damn proud of what we have achieved so far. So we will continue to try harder, and that would go to my second point, is that I would encourage the working group to not make perfection, as we say in our house, perfection the enemy of a job well done. I understand that the commissioner wants our kids back in full-time 5 days a week. If you come back to us as a working group and say, we can't make that work, but we can make something better work, I would encourage you to have that as an option too. I understand there'd be consequences. I just don't want us to say it's an all or nothing, because again, as a parent, as all of us are parents, we would like something that's better if possible. So I would encourage that. And I guess my last point is I would encourage everyone in the community to have a little grace for our teachers, our administrators. I won't ask for grace on the part of school committee members. We asked for this job. You elected us for this, so that's our job. But I would encourage you to have grace for your fellow parents who may have different opinions on different matters. So that's all I just wanted to say. Thank you. Dr. Evans, if you have anything, do you have anything further on the COVID update?
I do not.
Thank you very much. So we'll look forward to hearing more at our next meeting. And with that, I would move on to our action items. I realize that we have had a lengthy meeting, but the first action item, which is vote to approve the interim superintendent contract, we will not be ready to vote on that today. Ms. Bolognese and I have had some very fruitful conversations with Dr. Hackett. He's excited. We have come to agreement on the basic terms, but when we look at full contracts, they're complicated legal documents that actually do require lawyers. So we're looking at everything, making sure we can get everything right. And we are excited, and he is excited to be introduced at a meeting soon. And hopefully we will be able to report on that very soon. Are there any questions? So we do not have a vote needed today, but if there are any questions or comments that any committee members would like to make, I would welcome them. Seeing none, I would move on to the next agenda item, which is a vote to approve the mascot logo. And as you all know, we had a presentation from students and principal last week. I believe it was only a week ago. It feels like it was a long time ago. With a recommendation for the group. And Dr. Evans, I don't know if you have anything further that you would like to say regarding the recommendation, and or if there's any discussion that we would like to have about this. So I would welcome any questions or comments about the recommendation which was put forward. That was to have really the team name be the red and black. That was the recommendation of the working group at the presentation last week, with a design contest and design to follow at a later date. So I would welcome questions or comments, and if we are ready to do so, I would also welcome a motion to approve what is ultimately a team name, or the name, because it's not really a mascot and it's not really a logo. So I would welcome questions or comments. Mr. Nixon.
So this is the semantics observation I made at the last meeting. Totally support this, but I do think there's maybe a little confusion about whether it's red and black or the red and black, as you just articulated it. I think it's the latter. Our packet says red and black. I'm assuming it's the red and black.
So we reached out to Mr. Mahoney, and while it is at our discretion what we vote, the recommendation was the red and black.
I like that better.
Is that correct, Dr. Evans? I wanted to make sure I said, okay.
Yes.
Whereas, and I actually asked whether it would be an ampersand or the word and in between. Hey, if we're voting, we like, you of all people like to be precise when we vote. In fact, I was asking while I was thinking of you while we were voting, while we were asking that.
That's for the design team to figure out, my friend.
And ultimately that is for the design team. But it will also, when we write about it in a report, it is the red and black, and absent some design logo, it is A-N-D.
And that works well with the Winchester High School.
Indeed.
That's all I have to say.
Any additional questions or about the recommendation, or anybody prepared to make a motion? I would welcome either one, but I want to give everybody a chance to ask questions if they have any questions or comments.
I'm just to make the motion.
Oh, wait, just a minute, Dina. I'm just not clear. Are we voting on just the words because the committee said they were coming back to us with design later? Will we then have to vote on design versus voting it all together, or?
So I would refer to Dr. Evans on that question.
So legally, my legal opinion, even though there's a lawyer on this group.
Thank you, Attorney Evans.
Yeah. I don't think a vote is necessarily binding and does not bind any future school committees. So you can vote on, I think it's more of a validation of the work that was done by the transition committee, that you believe that this is a good recommendation and that you'd like to go with this. A new committee a month from now could vote something else, could vote ampersand instead of the word and, or could vote, it could suggest some other logo or mascot. And so what I guess what I would say is, I think it kind of closes the circle. We spent a lot of time this summer transitioning away from a Native American mascot logo, and this sort of validates the work that was done. And so that would be my recommendation, that you vote today to support this. And I think that they should present the final design for your approval as well, just to be sure that everybody thinks it's a good one.
Additional questions?
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the red and black as presented.
Second.
Any questions on the motion as made? A roll call vote being required. Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Ms. Marchant.
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The vote is unanimous. Go red and black. And thank you to the committee that spent, the working group that spent a lot of time surveying and really looking into all the details about this. We certainly didn't have the bandwidth to do all the work they did, and we appreciate them doing all of that and coming back with what is a great recommendation that we were happy to approve. With that, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which is a vote to appoint the curriculum subcommittee membership. So as you may be aware, well, as the committee is certainly aware, and as people at home may be aware, last week there was a recommendation from the policy subcommittee to appoint members to our curriculum subcommittee. And there was also a recommendation that that curriculum subcommittee look at our performance-based assessment / MCIEA work, and also look at our K-12 literacy in the district. I will remind members of the committee and members of the public that the curriculum subcommittee is how our school committee gets involved in curriculum adoption, how our committee gets involved in curriculum change. This is the policy way that we have set up over the years to do any work such as this. So I am happy to accept nominations if people would like to be appointed to this subcommittee. It's likely that the subcommittee will start meeting monthly in the coming weeks. Practically speaking, I will just say as a practical matter, that kind of rules me out from nominating myself. I certainly won't speak for anybody else in the committee, but I'm curious. I simply would like to ask if anybody would like to be one of the members of this subcommittee. I don't know that we have to go around the nomination process. Who wants to be on the subcommittee? We are looking for 2 members of our committee.
Before we do that piece, can I just throw out there that given that 2 members are leaving, given that reorganization is right around the corner anyway, is this something that the remaining members would prefer to leave until the first meeting of the new school committee, given that all of this is going to happen anyway in a few weeks?
So
I'm flexible either way because I won't be here.
So I appreciate that. I think this is my opinion. I would welcome others' opinions. We need to get moving forward on the work. We will have a reorganization after the election, and it will be up to then chair to make recommendations and with approval of the committee as far as who on these committees. There will be people coming off committees, going on committees. There certainly might be change, but I personally believe it's time to move forward, and I don't want to slow down anything just because we have an election. And if after the election there's a desire to change this subcommittee membership, that would be up to the discretion of the chair and the committee at the time. But I appreciate that, and if members of the committee feel otherwise, I would be open to that as well. Mr. Nixon.
So my understanding is we can have up to 2 members on this subcommittee. Is that right?
That is correct.
So then if it should come to pass that there's 1 member of the committee today that feels strongly about serving, then that may be a way to get the work started. And then after the election with the new school committee, if somebody else wants to serve, there's a spot for them and they can be brought up to speed. That might be a good compromise.
I appreciate that suggestion. I would ask if anybody is interested in being a member. I mean, we normally when we do a reorganization, the chair would send out an email to people and say, who wants to be on what committees? And we'd sort of the chair would do that. Because we're sort of staffing this sort of not when we normally do it, I would ask people who would like to be on this subcommittee.
I'm happy to serve on this subcommittee, but to Mr. Nixon's suggestion, if there's a second person that would like to serve as well, I agree with you, Mr. Vanalia, that certainly every time we have an election, we do a reorganization. I agree with you that the work needs to get started. I think that's going to be easier to get started if there's a second member willing to participate than 1, given how much work there is for the members of this committee to do.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. I appreciate your willingness to serve. Is there a second member who would be interested in serving? Ms. Bolognese.
And I am willing to serve as well.
Thank you both. I would therefore, as chair, recommend that Ms. Bergstrom and Ms. Bolognese be our representatives to the curriculum subcommittee. Normally, we would be voting an entire slate of of members for all our different subcommittees, but today we're just looking at this one. So I would welcome a motion to appoint both of them to be our curriculum subcommittee members.
So moved.
Is there a second? Thank you very much. A roll call vote being required. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much for your willingness to participate, and I look forward to, even if I'm no longer on the committee, hearing about the work that you guys do. So thank you very much. The next agenda item we have is approval of minutes. I received a request from a member, because we didn't get the packet until close to today's meeting, that we defer voting on minutes. I appreciate that. At the same time, I'm mindful that members of the community have a desire to see the minutes from our meetings as a timely manner as possible. So I would ask if people are comfortable voting on the minutes, or if they're uncomfortable voting on the minutes, and see how we go from there. Mr. Nixon.
Thank you. So, given that we got the package late yesterday afternoon, not because administration isn't already flat out with other assignments, so no criticism there. I had a chance to get through the minutes of January 19th, and I'd be happy to make a motion to approve as presented. But in the other minutes, there's some information I was expecting to see that I don't. So I would ask a courtesy of the committee if I have some time to sort of draft that together and send that to you and the superintendent to consider. To your point, public expectation and transparency is super important. Open meeting law requires us to have those draft minutes available upon request. And of course, they exist as drafts. So it's more about getting some additional information in there. And I just have not had time to do that, given I started looking at them at 11 o'clock last night and then had a meeting this morning. But I thought the minutes of the 19th looked great, and it's one way to just sort of move the ball a little bit so we don't have too much of a backlog. You noted our next meeting is going to be a lengthy one. So I'd certainly be pleased to make a motion. We approve the minutes of January 19th as presented.
I would welcome that motion. Ms. Bergstrom has seconded. Any issues? Are we ready to vote on the minutes of January 19th? Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Ms. Marchant.
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The vote is unanimous. So with that, I would state that we will, I would recommend that we postpone voting on the minutes of the 22nd or February 2nd until our next meeting. And I would reiterate what Mr. Nixon said, that members of the community do have access to draft minutes if they so desire. So that is a good path forward. Thank you very much for the suggestion, Mr. Nixon. With that, we will move on to the chair report. My first thing I'd like to state is, while we have scheduled office hours for tomorrow night, it is unclear whether or not we have two members who are free to attend office hours tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And while I do not want to have to cancel office hours, we might have to postpone to a later date when we can have two members who can attend. So I'm throwing that out there to the committee. I'm aware of only one member who can definitively attend. So that person knows who they are. Is there a second member who can definitively attend? Otherwise, I will just state right here that we are postponing. So, Mr. Nixon.
So I am happy to attend in the sense of the Zoom meeting of the word. But yeah. I would want, if we do hold this, I just want the community to understand my camera will be off because I'll be behind the wheel on the way to a hockey rink. So, I sort of feel like if we're hosting a meeting, people like to see who it is they're talking to. I won't have that option, so don't be offended. But if we pull it off and I'm one of those two attending, that's just my own circumstance.
Okay. So I guess my recommendation would be that if we don't have two members who can, and please don't think I'm suggesting that you wouldn't be giving it 100% of your attention, but hopefully you'd be giving a decent amount to driving and safety. So it, by definition, couldn't be 100%. I'm going to suggest that we move the meeting to sometime the following week, and I will work with you all to find if we can have two members who can attend a date potentially next week. But I'm not going to schedule it now because it just depends on all of our schedules. So tentatively, I'm going to state publicly here that we are canceling the office hours for tomorrow night, and I will find a way to make sure the community knows that, and I will make sure it comes off our town calendar so that people go to look at that, they won't see it there. So that is, did I have something else? I'm tired at this point. I don't know that I had anything else for a chair report at almost 1 o'clock. So Dr. Evans, do you have anything for a superintendent report that you haven't told us yet?
Yeah, just very quickly. Free COVID testing is available weekly by the town. I got an announcement today. I tweeted it and put it on Facebook, but go to the town website if you're looking for information on free testing for residents and employees of the town of Winchester. March is a month where we suggested that we needed to get in some elementary conferences. And so we're still wrestling with the idea of MCAS and how we're going to manage that. We don't have firm information from the DESE on that, but we are going ahead with scheduling conference days. So there are a couple of days I just wanted to be sure that people had on their radar screens. March 10th is a full PD day. That means it's not a remote learning day for students, it's just a day for teachers. We've canceled a lot of our other professional development in the district this year, but we do need to do this March 10th day for professional development. Elementary conferences generally are 4 early release days in the spring, normally, or January. We moved them to March. It's only going to be a day and a half. But we also have the complicating factor of the town election, which happens on the 30th of March. It is a Tuesday, and I want to give the town clerk a lot of credit. We tried hard to move all the voting to the high school. We just couldn't make it work for a variety of technical reasons. 4 of our schools do have voting. The middle school is able to work around it. The 3 elementary schools are not. And so what we've decided to do is on the 30th on voting day to have students at the elementary level learn remotely in the morning, and then in the afternoon is parent conferences. Then on the Wednesday, it's a full conference day at the elementary level, and students will not have remote instruction. So I'll send out a revised March calendar, but I just wanted to make sure people had that on their radar screen. It's a good solution, minimizes the impact on in-person learning, and keeps everybody safe, and provides for voting on the 30th at the 3 elementary schools that currently have it, and then the middle school. There will be full in-person learning from grades 6 through 12 on that Tuesday, the 30th.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. We have future agenda items. Our next meeting, I'm just saying our next meeting is on the 16th, and at that meeting will be the school choice public hearing. So we'll start with the public hearing, and then we'll go into a regular session after at the completion of the public hearing. K-5 literacy review update. Dr. Evans, do you have a goal of when we would do the K-5 literacy review update?
I'm still working with Dr. Ellen Emma on that.
Perfect. That's all I want. I wanted to know if we knew yet. I will be reaching out to all committee members about the superintendent 2020-21 evaluation process. So that's going to be presented then. So we have 2 short weeks. We always goes down to the wire anyway. So at least now it'll be down to the wire, and you'll actually have to commit to the timeline. So I will send something to each of you about providing the evaluation. As always, I encourage you to meet with Dr. Evans virtually and go over your recommended evaluation prior to coming to the meeting, but that is at your discretion. School transportation is a topic of conversation that we have coming up, and school handbooks will need to be approved. Those are the future agenda items we have at this time. Our next meeting dates are, as I said, March 16th at 6 p.m. That will be a lengthy meeting because it's got the school choice public hearing at the beginning. Then we have a meeting at April 6th at 9:30 a.m. and April 27th at 6 p.m. And you'll note that the meeting's a little bit further apart than usual because of the April vacation that we can't go every other week. If there's no other business to attend to, I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Nixon.
Just a quick question, if I didn't hear Dr. Evans say it, was there an update on in-person instruction with respect to election day? Did I see there's an update that we have more access to classrooms than we thought we did? Did you mention that?
She did during her
Sorry, I lost audio for a moment, so I just want to be sure we didn't miss that. Thank you.
I'll send something out. I'll send out something as an update to the community.
Thank you very much. So I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you very much. Roll call vote, Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Ms. Marchant.
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Vote is unanimous. Thank you all for another long meeting, but I appreciate all the work. Thank you very much. And thank you to WinCam.